evening. Special good evening to our community members who are with us here this evening, and good evening to those who are streaming with us. Start from the beginning. Okay. Good evening. Special welcome to our members who have joined us in person this evening. We're happy to be back here at the Library Media Center, which is more or less our home for board meetings. And so welcome to those members of the public who are streaming with us this evening. Dr. Cascone, fellow members of the board, and Mrs. Flowers. And this is our official opening of the West Orange Board of Education Public Board Meeting on July 26th, 2021. Mrs. Flowers, would you do roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, President Trick Scales. Good evening, everyone. Mrs. Huerta? Here. Mrs. Merklinger?
Here.
Mr. Rothstein?
Here.
Vice President Tunnicliffe?
Here.
President Trick Scales.
Here.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, taking a look at our agenda, we are ready for a motion of consideration of the closed meeting minutes of June 21st, 2021, and the public meeting minutes of June 16th and 21st, 2021, and July 8th, 2021. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? There being none, Mrs. Flowers, please.
Thank you. Mrs. Huerta?
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger?
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein?
Yes.
Vice President Tunnicliffe?
Yes.
President Trick Scales.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Flowers. And we're going to move into our superintendent and board reports. And Dr. Cascone.
Thank you, President Trick Scales. I have but a brief introductory report as the primary item on tonight's superintendent's report is an update on the 5-year strategic action plan. We also do have an HIB report, which perhaps I'll dispense with, first off, this will be kind of can clear that, but I did review the case. I reviewed the documentation information from the high school anti-bullying specialists and am submitting the report for approval by the board. Within 5 days of this date, communication would go out to both families, advising them of the result of the investigation. You're welcome. So just talk a little bit about kind of where we are, kind of like what's going on at this time in the school district. And I think there are kind of 4 different things that are happening right now. One, and certainly not of least importance, is the fact that we have approximately 1,400 students that are engaged in some form of summer learning, whether that be enrichment activities, extended school year programs for our special education students, academic support programs, and these programs span K through 12. So to those students, many of whom have voluntarily signed up for these programs, we commend them. We commend their parents for enrolling them in these programs. And of course, we We thank our staff who re-upped for another tour of duty over the summer to teach these programs. And we thank our partners in the state and federal government for the funding that enabled us to offer these programs. So I've had an opportunity to get out to a number of them. I will be visiting some more programs this week. Wacky Hat Day tomorrow at Kelly School at the ESY program. So looking forward to that. Always fun. And they're just doing a fantastic job in these programs. The second is as it relates to our physical plants and ongoing work which is happening in our buildings to ensure that they're prepared to be open in the fall. And some of that is your typical perennial work that's done, just simply deep cleaning of buildings, waxing of floors, ongoing maintenance, and some of it's a bit more involved. We several weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, at the last board meeting, we approved the successful bid vendor to conduct our HVAC work. And that work has begun. And again, this is work that's necessary to install mechanical ventilation systems in those spaces that do not have them, that we need to open our schools. I have not had an opportunity to do walkthroughs. I was at a district last week on a family vacation, but I intend to do some of those walkthroughs this week and check up on the progress of that work. Third is obviously, and certainly not of least importance, is the school reopening committees that continued to meet in my absence last week. We've been approaching them in a matter of where we meet with our school reopening committees, and there are 3, and they are health and safety, curriculum, instruction and assessment, and mental health and social emotional well-being. Those meetings are then followed by principal meetings where we have an opportunity to kind of debrief those takeaways with the principals and to kind of help inform planning. And then following that, we do a cabinet meeting, which is basically central office administration to help inform the planning. I'll tell you one of the primary points of planning right now is around lunch. I mean, logistically, that is arguably really the only challenging logistical planning piece. But we involved our food services director last week in those meetings. And again, I was not present at that meeting, but look forward to being updated on that. But in just reviewing some of the meeting minutes and the notes, those plans are moving forward constructively and productively. And really just to kind of give you a slight insight into that, I think the idea, and really it varies in challenge by level. It's probably easiest to plan on the middle school level where there already are multiple lunches and therefore the student body is already broken up into multiple sessions. Probably of most complexity at the high school level where there's a unit lunch and there are 2,000 students eating simultaneously. However, it is a large facility and there are multiple spaces. And so really it comes down to how are we maximizing the usage of our spaces and designating certain spaces for groups of students so that we can ensure that each space is not overoccupied. So we're working through that and we've made some great progress and know that within the next couple of weeks, we should have an operational plan mapped out for that. And fourth is we continue to do our submission of grants. I want to thank Mr. Mendez for exercising some leadership in helping to facilitate the submission of the ESSA grant, formerly known as the NCLB grant. This is a grant that we receive on an annual basis. It's broken up into Title I, which is designated for economically disadvantaged students or students at risk academically. Title II, which is for professional development. Title III, which is for English language learners and immigrant students. And Title IV, Mr. Mendez? It's sort of like a catch-all. Could be technology, wellness, well-rounded education. But thank you to Mr. Mendez. We've successfully submitted that grant, and shall hear back soon enough from the state in that regard. And that's kind of what we're up to at this point in time. Operationally speaking, in the school district, it's it may appear quiet, but there's an awful lot of work happening in our preparations. And finally, and as it relates to school reopening, I had spoken to our approach in terms of a means by which and through which to vet our protocols and our procedures as it relates to, amongst other things, masking, vaccines, things of that nature. recognizing that the guidance from the state is loose, we should say. It's discretionary on the part of the local school district, but yet the CDC guidelines are not really discretionary per se. They're a bit more prescriptive. And so how does a local school district reconcile that local discretion with the CDC guidelines? Certainly it's outside of my area of expertise as an educational leader with a doctorate in education and not in epidemiology. So what we've decided to do is to assemble an independent public health and safety advisory board. I will be reaching out to that board, which I've finalized the composition of this week. We'll be meeting for the first time next week, probably towards the end of next week, to pose some of these kind of critical questions, relative to our procedures and get some useful insight. So who will make up this panel? Well, we'll have our district physician, Dr. Kelly. We'll have Michael Fonzino, the director of the local Department of Health. We'll have two of our school nurses. We'll have an infection prevention specialist from RWJ Barnabas, an epidemiologist, as well as a physician who worked with Kushner Academy last year on their reopening plans. And finally, and this I have to thank a parent who reached out to me with the suggestion, a child psychologist specializing in the school environment and social emotional well-being to help balance out the physical health and safety with the psychological impact of things. So I'm very actually excited to be working with that board. And I think regardless of the direction that the district sets, we'll be able to understand that we brought a diverse group of qualified voices and perspectives together to help guide our efforts. So that is kind of what we've been up to. Prior to the strategic action plan presentation, I don't know if at this juncture, if the board had any questions specific to those portions of the report.
Any questions, board members? Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
With this board, and it sounds amazing with the group that you have together. When I know you're obviously in the planning stages, when can we expect to hear maybe what some of those plans and outcomes are going to be? Just
Great.
to kind of lay out the
Yeah,
timeline.
great question. So my goal is that not next week, but by the end of the following week. Can somebody help me with that date? Is it the end of the following week? The 13th. So my plan is that on that Friday, August 13th, I would issue basically a written communication to the parent community outlining some of our initial conclusions. And then obviously with the public meeting on the 16th, that would be an opportunity to present them to the public in greater detail. And also with the public, an opportunity to ask questions or, raise, comments or feedback.
That allow enough time for school? Should we decide to pivot or make any changes? Will that allow enough time, do we think, before school actually starts? Because I think we start September 8th, 9th,
Let's see.
right
So
after Labor Day.
yeah, right after the Thursday after Labor Day.
So it's the 8th or 9th.
I do believe so. Regardless of the direction we go, it's not really going to, to impact. In other words, it's not impacting the end game. And I know we had some questions that came through our Google form. We appreciate those. It's not impacting the end game, which is 5 days a week, full days, all students, right? It's a question of what does the school environment look like? How does it function? And I think, we'll be able to do that in, an ample time to be able to prepare our students for what to expect. You're welcome. Okay, so without further ado, and I are going to present an update on the strategic. Miss Graftisa, in the back.
Yeah.
And I will come up now. Okay, and by the way, board members, should feel free to take seats there in the front row.
It is switched to me. Fine, that's fine. Yeah, it switched to me. For me. That's great.
Check. Okay. Appreciate everyone's patience as we work through a few technical details. And no, Ms. Mendez and I will not be singing a duet. Okay, thank you, Ms. Graftisa, for your assistance. Right, so tonight we're presenting an update on really an update and kind of a culminating report on the district's strategic plan. And of course, this was reflected in the district goals and the board goals for this year, was to do a look back on the 5-year strategic action plan, which commenced in 2017 and concludes with the conclusion of this year. Just for some, just to understand kind of what we're intending to accomplish through this presentation. The first is to provide some historical context for how the plan was developed, when it was developed, but also, and really as importantly, to understand kind of how a number of historical factors and circumstances that occurred over the course of the lifespan of the strategic action plan, kind of how that impacted the implementation and really necessitated some changes and pivots, not so much in the goals, but in the cases to the plan. And finally is say, okay, now the plan of this plan has come to its conclusion in 2021. What's next for West Orange School District? How are we going to move forward in terms of planning for the future? So again, as I mentioned, this plan began in 2017. The planning for it began the previous year and was facilitated with the board and with the administration by the New Jersey School Boards with the assistance of New Jersey School Boards as part of the board's membership with school boards. This is a service which is offered to the board and to the administration. It was a plan that was informed by comprehensive feedback from stakeholders. While I was not here at that time, I was not here for the first 3 years of the plan. My understanding is that there was a lot of inclusivity in that process with parents and stakeholders to help form the objectives. For the first 3 years of the plan, there were status reports presented to the community relative to the status of those objectives and the completion of those objectives. Those presentations did not occur last year, and I think for obvious reasons, which we'll expound upon a bit more. But again, the adjustment of those goals as the world literally shifted on its axis for a variety of different reasons, not only because of a a global pandemic and really having to reinvent the way we have educated students since time immemorial in public schools, but also some of the social movements afoot, and how they really thrust conversations about equity and conversations about diversity to the fore, though they were already occurring in West Orange, but really established them as a priority, and one which was not really reflected specifically and explicitly in the previous plan. Right? I think it's also important to remember that, again, this plan was developed under a previous administration. That administration was in place for 2 years. We'll call year 3 a transitional year, where the administration changed into an acting administration under Mr. Mendez. And then, of course, in year 4 was the year I came into the plan. In March, our world was changed in a number of different ways. These are the goal statements, the 4 goal statements that were reflected in the original strategic action plan. And while I'm not going to read them verbatim, just kind of broad brushstrokes, you can see that it's facilities, program accessibility, readiness for future success, which obviously has technology as a key component, holistic health and wellness, and parent, school, and community engagement. So when we look at goal number 1, and I just want to clarify, and going into the next slide, you'll see that we've color-coded slides in green that were goals that necessitated some adjustment, we'll say kind of midstream, if you will. And not so that the goal didn't change, but it necessitated some modification to the objectives, right? Holistic wellness and safety took on a completely different meaning, and had completely different implications and planning needs within a global pandemic than it might have previously. And so, all of a sudden it really became about how are we going to return students and staff to buildings safely and smoothly. And so while it's not to say that HVAC concerns were not something that were being discussed, but it immediately elevated them to the top level priority that needed to be addressed at that time. And we did, and we are addressing those as much as possible within existing resources. By the same token, you talk about updating facilities to support current and future technological needs. And I would argue that is probably one of the most positive unintended outcomes of the pandemic was a digital divide that we had talked about was closed in a matter of weeks, in fact. And now with the more recent funding that's coming through the state, through which, and I forget the exact name of it, whereby a survey went out to the community recently where now we're going to secure funding whereby we're going to be able to provide households and students that don't have personal devices at home with personal devices. And similarly, when you talk about the skills, the technological skills, the 21st century skills that, the learning happened. Our students gathered, and yes, maybe too much time on devices, but by the same token, the skills that they developed and our staff, I can tell you that from having worked in administration for almost decades now, moving beyond that inertia of second order change as it related to technology usage by staff, we couldn't get out of it. This moved the needle overnight. All of a sudden, it required teachers to acquire technological skills and proficiencies that we always knew they needed, but for whatever reason, we weren't able to move that needle. So that was a huge and positive gain that now they'll be able to apply moving forward as we move back into a more traditional model, brick and mortar model. And finally, was the idea of research and grant partnership opportunities. Now, this is a goal or an objective that has made its way into the district goals 2 consecutive years. And later on in the presentation, I'll pull up a spreadsheet that will outline exactly how much money we've successfully been awarded in grants. And it's sizable. It's sizable. And it's been able really to impact those facilities. Approximately $4 million, at least $4 million of the federal funding that we've received through the COVID CARE Acts is going directly back into the upgrades of our facilities. So in terms of objective one, and again, there was a lot done relative to developing a safe return plan. Obviously early on in the year, we encountered some challenges with this relative to our ventilation, but within a matter of months, we had done what was necessary to get our schools open. And again, receiving over $6 million in American Rescue Plan grant money is being put to that use even as we speak in the upgrade of our HVAC. And again, really, I think it's just that idea of parent involvement in the process, whether it was, there were a lot of districts that boilerplated this, folks, with the American Rescue Plan. They put the plan up on the website and it's like, email us or you can come to a board meeting. We were deliberate in putting out a Google form to our parents and to our community members to ask for input on that. And that input that was provided for that initial plan continues to inform our planning to this day. Again, just continuing along in terms of, if you want to go to the next slide, Ms. Baptista, this just gives a little bit more specific details as to the HVAC work, approximately 50 mechanical systems, and also the automation of our univent systems. We came to learn was that our damper systems, which is basically the mechanism by which a unit brings in the necessary fresh air, weren't working. They weren't moving for years, frozen shut. The hydraulic systems that operate, the pneumatic systems that operated, long dysfunctional. So this required us to understand how we could do that. We started with our hot water units. We needed to because we couldn't leave them open during the cold winter. And now we're catching up with our steam units so that all of our univents will be able to be automated, modulated automatically through a central software-driven system. Now, to the critical thinker who's saying, that's an awful lot of money to invest in old univent systems. It's a good question. And I asked that question before we embarked on this path. And the good news is that all those, what they call brains, which are being retrofitted onto these older systems, can be removed and they can be added to new systems when they're put in. And buying the systems without the brains are cheaper. So it's actually not good money after bad money. These are all parts and materials that can be removed from the old units and then reinstalled on the new units. Goal 1, objective 2. There's been the ESSER funds as well as local funds we've gotten a ton of mileage out of these funding. In addition to security upgrades, having the necessary hardware to ensure that all students had one-to-one access, upgrading our Wi-Fi, ensuring that all of our rooms are equipped with presentational devices, if not smart boards, at least interactive projectors. That seems to be the trend things are going, moving away from the smart boards and moving more into the interactive projectors. But regardless, and I'm going to tell you something, that's not a given. You say, well, that's the way it should, and you're right, but that's not the case everywhere you go. Every one of our classrooms has now a smart board, interactive projector, and presentational capacities. Okay, and if you could just go to the next slide. And this is just some additional work that's been done through ESSER 2 funds. We are also simultaneously this summer completing security upgrades to all of our facilities, all of our foyers, our man traps, all of our entryways are going to be equipped with visitor ID management systems. And that's on top of a bunch of other security upgrades that have been performed over the course of the last 18 months, including ballistic film, new doors, lockable doors. We had a lot of our schools that did not have doors that could be locked or that had glass. So we've upgraded all of those. So in terms, just to kind of focus it back, when we talk about facilities, we talk about technology. Over the course of the last 5 years, there has been a significant amount of upgrading to both the technological capacity as well as the physical plants, though I should say that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done to our physical plants. Much of what we're doing presently, I don't want to call it band-aiding. It's just taking care of the most critical issues. We understand that we have some significant
physical plant needs. And I would argue, and we'll talk a little bit about moving forward, that focusing on facilities, addressing HVAC, addressing roofs, things of that nature, I would argue, in my humble opinion, should continue to be a part of our strategic plan. In terms of our grants, you want to move the slide, Ms. Baptista? And then if you would just click on the just click on that. Okay. So we've been trialing different partners for our grants. Last year we had a partnership with a school boards associated grant writing firm, and we had some success with them, but we wanted to try a different approach this year and go with basically a full service grant writing partner. And after kind of juxtaposing those two different types of partners, ultimately, we concluded that we got a better ROI, return on investment, if we use the school board's vendor, because they're a la carte. Now, at first you might think, well, a la carte is typically more expensive. But what happens is there's only so much time. You can only write so many grants in a given year. And the nice thing about the school board's partners, they charge you per grant as opposed to just charging you a flat fee of $40,000 a year and having to work harder to get that ROI. But looking at this grant analysis, and this spreadsheet is a 2-year spreadsheet over the course of the last 2 years. And once we pull it up, you can see it here. See, now it is a little bit of a delay, but that actually is one of the security features we've installed, which is a 2-factor authentication for email, which protects people's email from being hacked. So, you don't have access. Okay. Well, it will be presented publicly, and I can share that we've earned approximately $11 million in various grants and federal and state entitlements over the course of the last 2 years. Some of those have been competitive based. For example, we reapplied this year for the second year in a row for a $100,000 career and technical education grant, which is enabling our CTE department to expand upon their culinary program and partnership with our school, with our food services provider. And again, while yes, this is federal and state money, and it's not competitive per se, but these applications still have deadlines, they still have submission requirements, and still require the diligence of the school district to go after the money. So over the course of the last 2 years, again, approximately $11 million, and that's not including the ESSA grant. If you add the ESSA grant, and it's more in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 million. But the ESSA is, I want to say it's a given, but that's money that's really more kind of that you can count on for your budget. And with that, as we move on to goal 2 and readiness for future success, I would turn it over to Mr. Mendez.
Good evening. Lauren, if you could put all of the objectives on the screen. I don't know what's happening, so forgive us for the technical difficulties here. Something's happening with our presentation. But this evening, with goal number 2, readiness for future success, there were 4 objectives that we carried over from the prior strategic plan, and they revolve around increasing district performance over 5 years, developing an aligned instructional system that really thinks about curriculum assessment and professional development, developing an assessment framework that thinks about benchmark assessments, progress monitoring students regularly, and including intervention strategies. And then the last is to develop an instructional focus for students to read at or above grade level. And then on our next slide, all 4 of these objectives we addressed on the May 10th presentation to the board when we were looking at assessment, our progress. In the absence of state assessment data, we were able to provide the board our district data, how we were showing growth or where the students were in terms of a need for intervention, remediation, and or acceleration. We presented student performance on those district formative and summative assessments. We reviewed our assessment practices. We analyzed our standards and showed where the standards were that really needed to be scaffolded next year as we move into accelerated learning for our students. We talked about some of our vertical articulation outcomes and strategies that we would be implementing across the content areas to address learning loss. We presented our extended year and summer opportunities, and we also discussed our initiatives and next steps and instructional strategies. So that presentation is for the public. It is posted on our district website where we do go thoroughly through our progress this year. On the next slide, then I will focus just a bit on our reading strategies because these are the strategies that we've been implementing over time that were not included in that presentation. And when we're thinking about making sure that we have an instructional focus for students to read at or above grade level, since 1819, we've really keyed in on professional development for the areas of balanced literacy. We've brought in consultants. Our teachers have participated in the professional development. We've done instructional rounds. We've visited classrooms. We've worked with our staff to really lean into all of the best practices in the balanced literacy approach. And we've allowed them to also contribute to that professional development by saying, what is it that you need as teachers? What areas would you like us to focus on? And in part, largely from the teachers' K through 5 developmental stages of writing, K through 2 shared reading, and the 3 through 5 book clubs were things that teachers responded back with that they needed assistance. We also integrated the K through 12 grammar resources. Grades 4 through 5 curriculum was revised, rewritten completely, and then K3 curriculum and assessments were also revised based on observations and teacher feedback. Lauren, if we move to the next slide then. For this past year, we compacted our curriculum in all K-5 ELA units. This was done collaboratively with teachers. When we say compacting, it doesn't mean leaving out information or standards. What it does mean is going into greater depth with those major standards that were identified by the state. So the state published a document which really prioritized the standards that we would address this year, understanding we were all in hybrid learning across the state. And therefore, we focused in on those standards, went into depth with those standards, and any areas that we needed to modify or adjust, those will be the areas that we will scaffold next year. In addition, there were shifts to the RASKIDS reading assessment. Fontes and Pinnell benchmarks were administered to students. Our kindergarten literacy assessments were also administered to our little ones, where we have fall and winter data. And we have interventions identified for those students. There are ELA curriculum text audits that were completed to include our major objectives and goals around diversity, equity, and access. We've had multiple opportunities for virtual professional development for our teachers so that we can continue to move these initiatives forward, and of course, our vertical articulation. For next year, our professional development will continue. Carl Anderson is the guru of teacher of balanced literacy, comes from Teachers College, so he will be with us, yay, to work with our teachers to continue really focusing our effort on improving reading and writing, making sure that our students are reading above grade level. We will continue grammar exploration, evaluating instructional materials, building diverse and inclusive classroom libraries, strengthening the balanced literacy approach, and we will maintain our focus on student conferences, which allows us to identify strategy groups specific to student needs based on our conferences and observations of their work during class time. With regard to STEM, which is a different objective, which really specifically places an aim on expanding the K-12 STEM curriculum. This includes problem solving, project-based learning, developing students' critical thinking, communication, assessment, inquiry skills, and making connections to real-world applications. So Our progress to date is discovering STEM is in 6th grade, investigating with STEM is in 7th, and designing with STEM is in 8th grade. So we have, over the past 3 years, included STEM in all years of the middle school program. The middle school program continues to develop project-based learning activities. It's resulting in more interest, increased enrollment. Students are definitely participating with eagerness, right? The projects are really exciting. They have awards that they're given. Mr. Del Gershio, he has a Facebook page, right, where he shows and demonstrate all that the students are accomplishing. And so then there's really good progress being done in STEM. We continue also to integrate activities outside of the classroom with invention conventions, the Shark Tank competitions, and the department has expanded its course offerings at the high school to include home maintenance, which is really a really neat course, right? How do you maintain your home? How do you fix some basic things around the house? Again, real world applications for the students, home improvement, repair course, and honors architectural and engineering design 3, which completes our CTE courses. With goal 3, we are focused on holistic health and wellness. And so the goal focuses on promoting the wellness of the students pre-K through 12, not only physical activity, but mental health. And so then we've created experience across our curriculum that really encourage and motivate health and wellness, the multiple opportunities to engage in physical activities. We talked a lot in the beginning years about reducing stress and anxiety. So we've accomplished that in our curriculum, and now we're implementing that in our classrooms. And of course, providing healthy food choices with the elimination of the snacks and increasing the whole fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. When we're thinking about our progress in the area of creating experiences across the curriculum, of course, as we were in asynchronous and then hybrid learning, the physical activity was not conducted in the schools, but our physical education teachers did a phenomenal job, right? And I think you saw some videos to that effect for working with our students in online, right, in those settings so that students could exercise from home. And what we did experience was we saw the students exercising at home and families. We saw the parents involved as well. Daily fitness break activities were created. Those were led by elementary teachers. And so then we did see, although we were in hybrid and it was not what we expected to accomplish in person, we did see a great use of the technology to promote health and wellness. In the area of physical activities to improve well-being, reduce stress. Teachers integrated yoga, other forms of exercise, and also our 6th through 12th health and PE teachers continued with SEL, social emotional learning check-ins during their attendance, the use of motivational videos, and stress-reducing techniques were integrated into the health curriculum. When we're thinking about providing healthy food choices, again, while we were not in school in person every day, we are certainly proud to say that we were able to distribute 646,502 meals from September 2020 through May 2021. So our students and families continued to receive meals while we were not in school if they desired to do so. For those who were attending in person, they came on Mondays and Wednesdays. For virtual students and anyone 18 years old or younger, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays at each elementary school. And we also continued the distributions for weekends and holidays for our families. Throughout the hybrid learning, those meals did not include snacks, right? They still came with the fruit and the vegetable. The food was prepared from scratch. It was prepared in ovenable containers so that the families could warm them up at home and have them as meals if needed. And we did provide the grab and go meals with the fruits and the vegetables as well. So we do believe we met that goal in a very different way, but we met that goal. And lastly, for goal 3, social emotional learning, we're thinking about developing self-awareness, self-management skills to develop interpersonal skills, maintain positive relationships, decision-making skills. So we've provided professional development to our staff specific to social emotional learning. Also, resources were integrated into the curriculum. We've created SEL resources on our website for our students and our staff and our families. We are and we continue to review our current programs and resources in our curriculum. Next year, parents will see, students will experience the integration of social emotional learning across all areas of the curriculum. We've also developed an SEL summer program that's in effect right now. Our students are participating across all grade levels, and we are continuing to assess and make recommendations for different opportunities for the following year around SEL trauma and mental health. And as a part of our grant, we also wrote into the grant that these were areas of focus, and we will use some of that funding accordingly.
Thank you, Mr. Mendez. Coming towards the home stretch here. So goal number 4, parent, school, and community engagement. Speak a little bit about this. Specifically, the board public relations committee over the course of the last 2 years has, from my view, has become more deliberate and strategic in its work, and I know will continue to do that. A good example of that, and there's on the next slide, you don't have to go yet, Ms. Graftisa, talk about an example would be, board members attending PTA meetings, hosting town halls for the purpose of collecting, community feedback and parent and family feedback, and the formation of an ESL and bilingual parent advisory council through Mr. Plata and Mr. Cano, engaging in a partnership with Rutgers University Behavioral Health and bilingual parent liaison. And I think also just a fidelity to ensuring that school district communications are multilingual. More recently, after really consistently doing it in English and Spanish, now we are ensuring that all of our written communications are also going out in Creole. But also recognizing that this is being reflective is a point on which we need to continue to build and develop. We have, through our social media in particular, have expanded our outreach to alumni and gotten more alumni involved, but admittedly also an area, really an untapped, I would argue, resource for expertise, for resources, whatever the case may be. And I think in terms of, continuing to highlight student achievements at school events, whether it be through board meetings, a really, I would argue, extensive and exceptional social media presence that I would say is really second to, very few, if no, school districts relative to what we're doing here with social media, as evidenced by multiple awards that we've received from the school district public relations association. I forget the acronym, but we've received multiple awards from them for some of our social media campaigns. But really just in terms of trying to place an emphasis on communication, sending regular parent updates, town halls, surveys, retooling our district website to make it more accessible and user-friendly, also recognizing that's something we're going to continue to work on to really kind of whittle that down and make it a little bit more efficient for our parents. And more recently, this year, the formation of school-based parent advisory councils, as well as a district parent advisory council. And again, these are all initiatives which were kind of Gen 1, version 1 of these, and we're going to continue to build upon them. And I think just through creating an environment where parents have voice, you see some things sort of organically developing, not necessarily with the impetus of the school district, but kind of grassroots. I think a good example of that is the Parent Diversity Council that was formed at St. Cloud School and did some really outstanding work there. But all in all, there's been an effort to really, and I think, while at times the conversations have not been necessarily comfortable through this year, I think the positive is that they're happening, right? That people are showing up, people are communicating, people are expressing, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. It's not always necessarily warm and fuzzy, but that still doesn't mean it's not constructive. So I think we've seen that throughout the year, and particularly in the virtual format. And we continue to get great feedback through our Google form as well. So if we move on to the next slide, and this is just really as we start to say, okay, so we've we've closed the book on certain items. More times than not, work never really ends in schools. It's just you get to what you think is an end game, and then it's okay. So now where do we go from here? But suffice to say, there are certain aspects of the strategic plan which we can say were brought through to fruition, and others that maybe not as much. So just talking a little bit about this year and the goals that we had for the district this year, talking a little bit about an update. So obviously the first goal was to conduct a review of the district's 5-year strategic action plan. And the original intention was to do this at the culmination of the year on June 21st. But we had a lot going on June 21st, namely the Parade of Honors, and we just felt like it was a lot to put on the agenda at that time. But this sort of represents the coming of fruition to that first goal. While the state did table the actual NJQSAC audit for us, they did it only after we had gone through the process of the self-assessment and the gathering of all our documentation. So through our self-evaluation, off the top of my head, Mr. Mendez, do you recall what our self-evaluation score was? Was it 90 or when we did the DPR for QSAC? It was for curriculum instruction. Yeah. So, but we were pleased with our results, and we had no doubt that we would have passed with flying colors had we actually gone through the audit. Again, grant writing services and ensuring that we were gaining access to resources through grants, again, millions of dollars in grants that we were able to really use to enable us to remain open, and this summer to really deliver some excellent programming to our students. In terms of the next slide, Mrs. Raptisa. There you go. So we spent the better part of the beginning of the year really evaluating different partners with whom we wanted to engage in the conducting of a district equity audit. I would say probably towards the end of the first term, right around the new year, we landed on a partner, which was Hanover Research, and then began the process of really working on the instrument that we were going to administer to the community. We did, in fact, administer that instrument. We didn't get quite the response that we would have hoped for. We got a lot of students responding, but we didn't get a lot of parent members. So we want to take another bite of that apple, and we're going to do that early next year. So we have more parent respondents to that survey. And we're also in the process of sharing various data sets with Hanover with the end game of creating an equity scorecard, which we're optimistic we'll have completed by the end of the fall. So this was not, this may have been a bit of a lofty goal with everything else that was going on to have completed this audit. And so this was a partial completion of this goal, but one which will continue next year. Certainly in terms of establishing parent advisory councils, yes, we achieved the goal of establishing them, but that's just the beginning of the work. Right now, we need to understand how can we be as effective and efficient in our use of these. How can we make them inclusive in the decision making process? But certainly, this is a good step in the right direction to have established them. And finally, relative to one of the things that came out of that various forms of advocacy, social advocacy, last spring, and we got some great feedback from students and community members, was really something we knew, but was really called attention to, was the fact that our staff, there's a disproportionality between the demographic makeup of our student body and our staff. Now that's not a unique challenge, but it is the idea of can we diversify our staff? again, while obviously wanting to hire exceptional candidates. And so the data that we collected relative to this, we collected in September. We still have a significant number of positions to hire for. And so we will be prepared to provide a comparative analysis of those percentages in the fall. But what I can tell you is just in terms of the systems and the interventions, the mechanisms that have been put in this place by Dr. Vespignani, our personnel director, whether it's partnering with local organizations that specifically have as their mission minority recruiting, whether it is expanding our footprint into universities, whether it is, again, even in the midst of a pandemic, hosting a virtual diversity job fair, or even just the kinds of branding that we do in our job ads, in the questions that we ask of prospective candidates, placing a priority on those kinds of things about inclusivity in the classroom, sensitivity to differences between students, whatever they may be, right? And so, we have seen, some systems changes. We will be evaluating in September the degree to which those system changes have moved the needle in terms of percentages. I can tell you, as far as administrative hiring, administrators, central office, and building leadership, we've brought some significant diversity to bear in our hiring there. In more recently, principal hirings and central office hires. So that's, so I would say, amidst really more than a full-time job of trying to continue to move a district forward amidst a pandemic, and having, what our school board's consultant said, wow, you guys were ambitious, having like 6 goals. I think all things considered, we did a pretty good job in continuing to move the ball forward on some of these goals, but recognizing that some of them will be ongoing processes. And again, this is just when we talk about the plan to create a new strategic plan. Really, that process started really tonight by through this presentation and through the process of taking stock of where we are. Because in some ways, some of what we were unable to accomplish over the course of the 5 years, we'll have to look at as a board, as an administration, as a community, and say, is that still important today as it was 5 years ago? Okay, good. Well, then let's put it back on the docket, because we didn't really accomplish. Example, there was a priority in the plan about the safe routes to schools. That was in there, right? And we have accomplished, some of our schools have moved forward and achieved that status, the safe routes to school status, whether it be bronze status or silver status. We have a number of schools at that, but we obviously did not see to it that all of our schools achieved that status. So if that is something that the community still has a priority on, then that's something we can place back on the new plan, as something to see through to fruition. But this process of evaluation, taking stock, is really where that begins. In the interim, because we recognize that engaging in a new process of strategic planning, and while we haven't solidified this as with the board, we've had some preliminary conversations. It's poised to engage in this process next year. It feels like it's the right time to do that. Now, in the interim, we're going to develop a 1-year plan, right, which to some extent will be informed by some of the things that are still remaining in this plan, and to some extent will be informed by what we know are priorities right now, right? So we know, for example, that we have to address learning acceleration. I mean, we know that what came through in our surveys, and it has to be present in our goals. We know that we have to be mindful of the social emotional well-being of our students or staff as they come back into the environment, right? And we know that we need to continue to place an eye on examining disproportionalities as they exist along different lines, whether it be disability, gender, race, and so on and so forth. But what will happen is, within the next week, I will share with the board some rough district goals. The board began their process of goal setting with the town hall that happened in June. Okay, that established sort of the macros of what the goals should be. And I don't want to speak for the board, but they'll merge the survey data, the town hall feedback, and the rough draft district goals with which I provide the board. And really at the August 16th public meeting is where they'll engage in a public discussion to really thresh those out a bit more. Once we have those, then we can finalize both the board and the district goals along the timeline as necessary, which will be for a September approval. Obviously, amidst that process, between that August date and the September approval date, it's a great opportunity to push those draft district goals out to the community, feedback, right? And then we'll have one final feedback loop with the community on those goals, and then we'll be prepared to approve them at the first September meeting in time for when our staff come back. And that is a perfect way to do it because staff come back and they can see, here are our priorities for the year. One final piece, which is just something that I'll be kind of pushing out in the next week or so, is we've talked a lot about the need next year to have a common theme as a community around which to rally. You know, something with which we all identify as staff and community members. Sort of a slogan, for lack of a better word, motto. And so I said, what better way to do that than to put that out to our kids? Put that out to our kids. I never cease to be amazed when we ask our kids the amazing things we come up with. We'll identify a short list of possibilities, put them out to the community for a vote. And then this way, when we come up with our motto, our theme for the year around which we all are rallying, it will be one that was developed inclusively with the input from the community. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see what our kids come up with. And I think that'll be really important next year to have a rallying cry around which we can all really work. So with that, that concludes the presentation. And at this time, I believe we can return back to the dais for questions. Mr. Mendez, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Cortese. And thank you, Dr. Cascone and Mrs. Mendez. And so we will start with questions from the board. Ms. Huerta.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Cascone and Ms. Mendez. Thank you, everybody, for being here. That was a great presentation. A lot to absorb, a lot to take in. Are we doing just comments or questions? Questions.
Comments, questions.
Okay. So I will just go to page 7, goal 1, when we talk about the digital divide, and we did a lot of work in addressing the technological barriers that our students had and the access to technology. And that was a lot of work that was done. And I'm really happy that the district was able to even give Wi-Fi access to the students. That's really important. Where I did notice when one gap was closed, another appeared, right? I think it was where parents weren't able to use the technology. We saw teachers were having trouble. And so those kinds of things, I think obviously in person, it's easier to address. And now that we're able to get back together, focus a bit on that as well. Teacher, parent workshops and things like that, I think is something that I would like to see. I think parents, even without language barriers, sometimes have issues with technology. So just thank you for that. When we talked about objective 2 in goal 1,
man traps and the lockable doors. Those are kind of easy fixes. Um, the other concerns, I know we have a lot of roofs that we continue to work on. And just one thing that I didn't hear mentioned was structural integrities of our buildings. I know Washington, we spoke about it, has that retaining wall, and just to keep an eye and be mindful that that retaining wall at Washington in particular has been kind of always put to the back burner. And so just concerned of the safety overall, but definitely, I know we've discussed it and we've addressed it. So I don't know if you want me to stop.
Yeah, I'll chat a little bit about that one. Yeah, the good news is that the district has, like, in a box on a shelf, a detailed referendum that was developed just prior to when I came. And ultimately, we decided to table it for two reasons. It was approximately $54 million. And so I think the idea was that the community did not have the will at that time. Of course, that was pre-COVID, right? And really complete transparency about our HVAC issues, which now are well known. The second was that referendum was developed with only a critical eye on HVAC, roofs, and maybe a couple other projects. I do believe the Washington retaining wall was in that. But what was done without was a comprehensive evaluation of all of our facilities to, for example, understand if there were structural issues with our buildings, like, for example, happened at Montclair when the stairwell collapsed in the high school and they had to shut the high school down. So now we have two things. Subsequent to that, our architects of record conducted a comprehensive facilities evaluations of all our buildings. So we are aware of any and all issues that exist in our buildings relative to envelope, relative to surrounding curbs and walkways, and obviously roofs, HVAC, things of that nature. So we're at a decision point as a district, as a community, as a board. We do have in the budget the necessary funding to move a referendum forward. So I would say that that's something that, further conversation which we should engage about, do we want to move forward with a referendum? If so, what do we want to be present in that referendum? And what amount would the board be comfortable moving forward with? But yes, you're absolutely right that we are at that crossroads as a district for a referendum, notwithstanding some of the financial challenges that exist within the community.
What is the timeline about if we were to do the referendum? How do we accumulate, because
Yeah.
it is a process.
Well, without not having a detailed game plan, but we'd be looking to go out late fall, probably, I think that you can do December. And then I think you can do, I believe, February. I don't recall. February, March. Yeah, so we wouldn't want to do it too early because we need to give ourselves some runway to get things going in terms of, explaining it, putting a public relations campaign out to help the public understand. We'd need some runway for that. But we'd want to get it done early enough where we could break ground that summer. It would obviously be a multiple year process in terms of how long and what would be prioritized in terms of the work. That would be something that our architects and the vendors would kind of map out, but it'd be a multiple year process. I think, minimum of 2 years with 2 summers of work.
Question.
No, it's something we had kind of a lap around the track with it a couple of years ago. So it's something we've been thinking about.
So talk about goal 1, objective 3. Oh, sorry, I thought it was too close before. So we didn't get to see the 2-year spreadsheet, but I hope that we're able to pull that up at some point later, or I mean not today. But.
Now, just as a sidebar, Now, the community needs to have access. The board, actually, I shared it in my evaluation documentation. So you do have access. You do have access to it, but indeed, it should be accessible to the community when that gets posted publicly.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So I did see that we were able to, secure a lot of grants, and that was really good news. Would we be able to see more? I mean, I know that we've just created different positions where we'll be able to see more, possibly more grant opportunities. And just one that kind of comes to mind, I know the community has spoken a lot on pre-K expansion grant, and that we are eligible for these grants, but we just haven't gone out. And I know one of the, I guess, things that hold us back is the space, the
Yeah.
lack of space. Would we be able to create a committee of, I know we've had great success with committee work, I think, in the district
Yeah.
so far.
So I think the preliminary process, collaborative process in which the district engaged with some members of the community on this was fruitful on a number of levels, because it really led to a lot of research and learning on the district's part about exactly what it would entail to successfully apply, but as importantly, implement over the course of 5 years this grant. We understand what we need to do. We understand what we're currently lacking. But I think what also emerged from that process was the fact that this needs to be a more inclusive process. And while there may continue to be some form of a committee, kind of a standing committee, the conversation around this grant and this program needs to be far more inclusive of the larger community, to anyone who maybe want to be a part of that conversation. And that includes, the parents of our special needs students who currently have children in the BMELC, recognizing that in our efforts to go for this grant and offer pre-K, we certainly don't want to diminish the services and the environment in which these students are currently learning. Meaning that we don't want to have half the classes at a modern state-of-the-art facility like the BMELC, and the other 4 classes at an older parochial school. That's the facilities are substandard to what they're offered at BMELC. So yes, and in fact, we talked about at our last meeting that this arguably would represent a valid goal as a district goal, to assemble a committee to create an inclusive process of community feedback and information sharing, and then ultimately to apply for the grant and successfully be awarded the grant the next window. I feel pretty strongly about it. I know our community does. And I think it would represent a worthwhile district goal for next year, to ensure that it doesn't fall off the docket. Right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess this one might be for you, Mrs. Mendez. For goal 2 and objective 4, when you spoke of teacher feedback, and they gave a feedback of wanting assistance in K-5 development stages of writing, shared reading, what kind of assistance are we talking? Is it like community, teachers, parents?
So the teachers themselves, when we were identifying areas that we could best support them in terms of professional development in a balanced literacy, that's where they identified specifically writing or shared reading or that conferencing piece, right? And so then when we went in to do the professional development or to bring in consultants, or during our district professional development day, we developed workshops and learning around those specific areas of focus.
Thank you. When you spoke about goal 2, objective 4, I think this is page 18, student conferences. What does that entail? Do we already do student conferences? just a little more in depth about that.
Sure. So a student conference is during a classroom activity or lesson. I would conference with a student. I would sit side by side with a student. We would look at a goal that we're working on with that student. We would discuss that goal. We would go through some very specific teaching points and strategies to achieve that goal. We would discuss with the student where they're headed next. And that's how we're kind of getting information from the student as to what they're able to accomplish in that very specific skill area. So that's student conferencing. It's like an assessment without the pen and the paper, right? It's me talking to you, me observing you as a student accomplish a task or approach that task, and then me taking notes to say this is what the student was or was not able to do, so that the next day or in the next period of lesson planning, I can address that student's need individually and specifically.
Does the student request this type of conference or it just happens automatically?
All students are conferenced with as a part of the balanced literacy model. It's a very strong way to assess.
Right, okay. I think some kids might be happier than others to have this
Yeah.
kind of assessment.
It becomes a part of the routines and the procedures, and the students are used to it. And so then they, we're training them to enter into that conferencing period with the ability eventually to self-assess, to say, this is specifically what I am unable to do. Can you help me with this?
Yes, exactly. This is where I was going next, where with child empowerment and self-advocacy,
Mhm.
because these are skills that you're going to need
Absolutely.
in life.
Sure.
So this is really important. How do we start this at a certain age? or-
Kindergarten.
Okay, thank you so much. One more. When I heard about the Shark Tank competitions, are all of our schools involved in this? That's so interesting. I love Shark Tank. So,
Right now, it's at the middle schools
Okay.
in the 6th through 8. I'm not sure. It may be at the high school. I can ask Mr. Del Garcio to provide specific details around those competitions.
okay, yeah, I would love to see the younger grades. I think, and kids, they just love to experiment and be really hands-on and messy. And so I think, to just nurture that from a younger age, and we do have a lot of great middle school programs and high school programs, but I think, trying to get younger, interest early on. Help. Uh, Just a couple of points on the holistic health and wellness. I think we did a great job during the pandemic providing food for a lot of our families. One thing that we didn't mention or wasn't mentioned in the slides was partnerships. We had partnerships with Holy Trinity Church. What was the other one? There was Tony's Kitchen, I think it was as well. There
Mhm.
was a truck that was parked. Then we also did 6-pound boxes of produce. I think those were the days when the lines were the longest with our families. They were really happy to, walk away with their box of produce. So that was really, you can see that our families are health conscious and want fresh produce, and just to see that, was really nice. And I think that's all my questions. I don't want to steal all the questions from everybody else. Thank you.
Ms. Huerta, Ms. Merklinger.
So that was definitely a very inclusive and a lot to take in presentation, but definitely a lot of really great points, and I'm glad to see we're moving forward. What I didn't, and I'm assuming this is inclusive of it, but the 18 to 20-year-old program, I did not see that specifically drawn into here. I know I saw a lot of pre-K to 12, but I just want to make sure that we are including the 18 to 12, 18 to 21, excuse me, program in this, and maybe we make note of it somewhere.
Sure, it was included in the May 10th presentation, but
Right.
we could make sure that when we publish this strategic plan on the district website, we put that presentation right behind it so that it will be comprehensive.
Perfect, thank you. I just know that that's important to make sure we include all of our students. In terms of, so on slide 11, goal 1, objective 2, with the ESSER funds and in regards to the laptops and technology, which I think has been amazing. Not only the partnership, not only the fact that we were able to provide all our students with technology, but the partnership with the town to provide hotspots and just everything just all coming together. But with these funds, I know in our budget, we have a technology line.
Mhm.
Can you speak a little to how this impacts maybe that budget line item for us?
Sure. So one of the critical pieces in balancing this year's budget was we knew that we had to allocate a significant amount of funding to refresh the devices which were being used K2. The devices that were being used K2 were probably the oldest of the devices. We were having to replace them most over the course of the year. We knew that we were going to need to enter into a lease, and that this lease was going to be a $200,000 a year lease over the course of 3 years, starting with this coming fiscal year and then 2 years after that. What we were able to do was we were able to actually shift that expense into the ESSER 2 fund, thereby not only saving the $200,000 expense in this year's budget, but also eliminating that expense in the following second and third year. We continue to, and I believe this year, Ms. Flowers, correct me if I'm wrong, and I think President Trigg Scales raised the question of that there was a $173,000 lease payment for this year, which is of course a payment on an existing lease on previously refreshed devices. So we have not only lease payments on previous cycles of refreshing of devices, but then we also have all of the technology supplies that come with, operating a district this size, from replacement parts to technology services to software and things of that nature. So really what all this did was it enabled us to shift some of what would have been funded out of the local budget into the ESSER 2. Now, moving forward, when the ESSER funds drop, are no longer there, we have to assume that at some point in time they'll no longer be there. We will simply have to go back to budgeting that we had previously for our technology. But this represented a timely windfall when we really needed it. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did.
Okay.
That was perfect.
Okay.
That actually explained a lot, and I think that's helpful for our community members that had questions about. It seems like we're buying laptops, getting laptops, refreshing laptops every
Yeah.
year. So I think that just kind of helps give some clarity around that. I know last year with the grants, Hanover Research, I think they provided us, I want to say it was like almost 80-page book of different grants that we might be interested in. Do we think that that's something that they'll continue to do?
Yeah, so we're going to switch back to our previous grant partner, and in fact, they send. Have you had follow-up conversations with that grant? Grant, I think I connected you with that grant writing. Okay, so they provide weekly briefs, grant briefs, and will also do specific prospecting. And all that comes with, I think, an annual membership fee of about $3,000 or $4,000. And then any grant that if you want to contract with them to actually write a grant, I believe they charge about $5,000 per grant. So in addition to the prospecting and the grant updates on a weekly basis, we could have them write as many as 4 grants for us and still actually be under what we were paying Hanover annually. So it's not only an fiscal efficiency, but after having juxtaposed the 2 vendors, I essentially concluded that we get more bang for our buck out of the school board's book. But what I will say, and I think this is tangent to Ms. Huerta's point as well, is I don't feel that we've realized our potential, notwithstanding the fact that we've earned millions of dollars in grants, in particular as it relates to private grants, foundations, corporate grants, and then above and beyond grants, sponsorships, corporate partnerships. This still remains a largely untapped territory insofar as generating additional revenue streams. So that needs to continue to be a focus for any school district, including this as we look for other ways to fund things.
So I think, my next set of questions kind of relate more to curriculum and instruction. So Mr. Mendez, you might be the one to help out with
Why
some
don't
of
I
these.
answer, and Mr.
Okay.
Mendez can grade me.
Okay. There we go. So, obviously with the May 10th presentation, I was a little disappointed to see some of our results. I think as some of our community members were, and understandably with, virtual learning and COVID. Could you just remind us again what vertical articulation is for our community that might not recall?
Sure. So vertical articulation, yeah, and thank you. We get very, trapped in our jargon. And so I appreciate that. So vertical articulation is when you think of vertical as K-12 and articulating between grade levels. So for example, fifth grade teachers vertically articulating with sixth grade teachers so that sixth grade teachers understand those students coming in, what specific strengths, what specific weaknesses, what standards they need to focus on in the curriculum. Horizontal articulation is when teachers, say, for example, all the third grade teachers are coordinating, say, during the year, maybe at the beginning of the year. And we've talked about that as a focus for the opening day, is to give grade level teachers an opportunity to be collaborating about, those opening day plans. So that's the difference between vertical and horizontal.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So with some of the, strategies that we put into place. So with the summer programs, summer enrichment programs, I think I'm a little cautiously optimistic to hear, because it sounds like everything, and it's just maybe semantics, but it sounds like we're saying next year. So I'm kind of wondering, what are we doing now that's going to move us forward? So just in terms of like the summer opportunities, when do we expect to see some of the results of that work and how students performed and did, and have we noticed, an improvement in some of the students that had some of that learning loss during the course of the year?
Yeah. So what we have now is that the culmination of the year for every element, we'll talk elementary because I think that tends to be where more the focus is. For every student at every school, we have rosters of students who, based upon where they were performing at the end of the year, have been identifying need of tier 2 intervention services and tier 3. So within a multi-tiered system of supports, you have level 1 intervention, 2, and 3. 1 tends to be delivered within the classroom by the classroom teacher. 2 can also be, but more commonly than not, tier 2 and tier 3 intervention services happen by pull-out. They're delivered by either a basic skills teacher or a reading specialist. And so we have that data. There are a couple of limitations to that data. One, which you've astutely pointed out, is many of these students will be participating in summer programs and could potentially be improving their skills over the course of the summer. What makes assessing them during the summer difficult is that not all of the teachers who are working with the students during the summer are necessarily trained to administer the reading assessments that need to happen. So what does that mean? It means that at the onset of the year, we're going to be reassessing students. Now, there is a connection point there, Mr. Mendez, and I'll ask you to weigh in there. Can you come to the mic publicly and speak a little bit about this state SMART assessment?
Sure.
Hmm.
All right.
Thank you.
So in September, all districts are required to administer the strong assessment.
Strong assessment.
Start
sorry.
Strong.
Yeah.
For the NJDOE. What the Start Strong assessment really thinks about is just a unit of measure. So it's not the NJSLA in full. It's a fragment of a component of a component, just to get the district an idea formatively of where the students are in these priority standards, give us some data. The assessments will be administered the last week of September. It is required for us to administer those in ELA and in math, grades 2 through 8. And then in the high school, there's the Algebra 1 and the geometries and the science assessments. We will have instant results in terms of students knowing how they performed because it is computerized, and then district reports will come about 6 weeks after.
So thank you, Ms. Mendez. So I mentioned that only because I think, and while on a level, we appreciate the state's interest in assisting us, it's another test, right? And I think we we want to be mindful not over testing our kids too much too soon. But I think the takeaway, Ms. Merklinger, is that we have data, performance data, standards-based data, grade level data for all of our students down to the student. Those rosters are developed. And so, in other words, we know the students who right now are in need of the greatest support, and we'll be able to hit the ground running with those supports at the beginning of the school year. And then when we get the Start Strong assessment data, the use of that, I would argue, is going to be able to triangulating that data with our own local data to determine if there's a correlation. And, ideally there is, which lends validity, reliability to our local assessments and, helps us understand exactly what the student's strengths and weaknesses are.
So we would expect then, and this is not
Yeah,
right now.
So I don't
expect
think
it
I
right
totally
now, but-
answered your question.
No,
Let me
no,
see
you
about
did.
what we're doing now versus. did I-
Yeah, so it's
Go ahead.
kind of, I know we're gonna talk about on August 16th,
Mhm.
reopening, but will that also include some of the curriculum and instruction expectations or changes that we're making that parents
Absolutely.
can expect to see? And because I think folks are starting to get a little worried that we're getting
Yeah.
closer to that first day of
Mhm.
school and we don't know, I'm not saying we don't know what we're doing, but
Yeah.
it sounds like we're not really sure what we're doing.
Yeah,
yet.
and after a couple of years in the community and getting a lot of feedback from I know the community, so I sense the community on this one. I know, I understand. And what we'll do on the 16th is not only present relative to we'll present in those three buckets. We'll present from a health and safety standpoint. We'll present from a curriculum instruction and assessment standpoint, because Mr. Mendez and I'm sort of co-chairing, but Mr. Mendez is really leading the conversations with our CIA committee. There's some great conversations and great takeaways coming out of that committee for considerations. And we'll present on the mental health and the social emotional well-being plan as well. So they'll get a three-pronged presentation on the 16th, where we'll provide updates on some of our specific and tangible strategies that we're going to be utilizing.
Oh, perfect. Just one last item.
Mhm.
I noticed that this focused heavily on ELA, and I think we struggle in the arena of math as well. So I was just wondering if there was anything that we're planning to include, or if we have considered, or why we didn't consider putting anything as specific about the math program.
I'm going to take a piece of that, but then I'm going to lateral you to provide some specifics on the map, because we were just looking at that data, which I thought was a positive. And then you probably could shed some light on K-12 mathematics, some of what's on tap. Great question had come from one of our community members. In fact, she had reiterated it in the Google form, which we'll address when we get to that. But a good question came up. It's like, so when we compare West Orange's performance on the map, and this was specifically in second grade, how is West Orange this year? How did we perform comparatively to the national norm? And we were actually, we were pretty pleased with what we saw. So I don't know if you want to speak to that data, but then also more globally, K-12, about the different things that are on tap next year for math.
Sure. So again, on the May 10th, we presented all of the math data. So that is on our website, but specifically in math, we looked at our end of unit assessments in everyday math. We looked at the culminating units. We looked at student progress for middle school on iReady, and at the high school, of course, all of our assessments there. When we're thinking about MAP and in comparison to norms, we looked at our elementary school data. In second grade, we were with the norming of across the country by 0.42 difference. So we were below by 0.42, not even a half, right? Which we know is statistically insignificant. And in grades 3 and 4, we were behind by 1.5 points. And then in grade 5, we were above by 0.36 points. So we are faring right in with the norms in elementary math in MAP after a pandemic year. So kudos to our teachers and to our students on a fantastic job at really working with our young ones in math in a hybrid environment and still being able to make and or exceed those norms.
And I know you've been very involved with the supervisory core relative to math initiatives, PD. Can you speak to some of what's on tap from a math PD standpoint and departmental initiatives that you are aware are kind of on tap for next year?
Sure. So I think a great focus is really looking at the curriculum that was compacted in comparison to where we need to go next year. Again, I'm reiterating when we say compacting, it doesn't mean we're not teaching content or we're leaving content out. It just means that we're focusing on the priority standards that the state identified for all public schools when we were going into hybrid and then going into greater depth. So that might mean taking out some fluff activities, if you will, right? And really just staying focused on the specific areas that we're looking at. And so then when we compare the compacted curriculum to the whole of the curriculum, the majority of the feedback from staff in our committee meetings, in our feedback sessions has been, let's stay with the compacted curriculum for the following year. This will allow us again to push into depth and not, spread ourselves out into coverage. We don't want to cover a lot of content. Instead, really spend quality time with the areas that the students need to focus on. In that standard analysis, we were able to identify with assessments the areas in the standards where the students need additional support and acceleration. And that will be our focus next year, accelerated learning. It will not be remediation. All right. So remediation would look backwards and say, let me cover all of the things that I didn't say, and I'm standing in the past, versus where we come into our current grade level standards and we say, what are the areas that the data are saying the students need additional support in? We identify where in the current grade level units those skills are, and then we build in prerequisite skills and instructional strategies and scaffold some instruction right before the unit so that we can ensure that students are progressing. And so then that's our goal next year. That standard analysis has taken place across all content areas, specifically math as well, but in all content areas. And then in math, we're using.
Mr. Mendez, can you speak a bit more specifically about that process? Like when that happened and how that happened?
Sure. So we began in February. In February, we began to really compare our compacted curriculum with our standards and where we were moving next year. The teachers met, all teachers across grade levels met together, both vertically, right? So fourth grade teachers sat with fifth grade teachers to look at the areas of need based on the data and the curriculum compacting. And the fourth grade teachers talked to the fifth grade teachers, if you will, to say, the fourth grade students you will be receiving next year will need additional support with this standard in this unit, this standard in this unit, etc. And so then all of that data was gathered by the teams and the supervisors to then make documents that will accompany the curriculum to say, in math grade 6 specifically, here's the curriculum and here's the standard analysis so that you'll know where to scaffold the instruction. So we began that work in February. Teachers were then instructed to go and take all of the work that was done to continue working through that with their horizontal teams, their grade level teams, all right?
Or similar courses.
Or similar courses, yes. And then they came back in April for a full day of district professional development to do that again. And they continued that work. In June, supervisors sent out some brief documents, right, that the teachers could use for their summer planning. And then when we come back to school in department meetings and grade level meetings, then that work will continue. But the teachers are equipped with understanding, what it is that they accomplished in that February, April, and in that exiting process for the compacted curriculum, for the standards analysis, and for the formative assessments.
And thank you, Mr. Mendez. And I wanted Mr. Mendez to go in, if you'll allow, Ms. Merklinger. Thank you. I wanted her to go into detail on that to illuminate the fact that the preparation for September was ongoing throughout the course of the year, right? So because we understand that the summer, it's teachers aren't here, right? And we know we have a relatively very small amount of time before we start the school year. And we know that this year in particular, we're going to be focusing on Maslow's lower end of the hierarchy in terms of when people come back to be feeling safe physically, and that their rooms are clean, are oriented, right? So we knew that we needed to prepare teachers starting back in February for what was going to come in September. And I think that actually we've sort of circuitously come to your question, which is so people understand, what are we doing now? Well, what we're doing now is we're really just we're planning to get our buildings open. We're planning for our opening day. We're continuing to flesh out our PD. But the work in preparing teachers for what to be doing on day one of next year started in February. Yeah, yeah, I see.
Um, just
Yeah.
just to kind of follow up, and I apologize if I missed it because that
No,
was
you're
very
good.
thorough and I appreciate that. But why did we not include math in the strategic goals, I guess? I know, like I said, we have ELA, we have STEM mentioned in here. Why did we decide not to include math? Was that
Yep.
intentional, or is that, I know you mentioned the May 5th presentation. And I know you mentioned before that the 18 to 21 part of that is going to be, added in with this. So is that kind of the same idea, or was it intentional to leave math off of this?
No, it is. We did cover it on May 10th. And if you'll notice in the goals under readiness for student success, one of the objectives specifically addressed reading, and that was set apart when the strategic plan was developed. So math was included in the overall objective number 1, which was to increase student achievement over 5 years. But there was a specific objective to reading in the strategic plan, and that's why we addressed it specifically here.
Yeah, I was looking for something a little bit more intentional for math. And I think
So
that's
then
what I
it
was
would be
looking
in the May 10th. And again, when we'll post both just to make sure people can see
Perfect.
both.
Great, thank you. That was really all I had in terms of questions, but I did just want to commend, looking at the holistic health and wellness and the meal distributions. I just want to commend again all of our partners and the staff that volunteered to help out to distribute those meals, and all the faculty that was involved. So I think that was just a great, feather in the cap to our community for coming together to ensure that got done, and to all of our teachers who ensured our students were being physically active. I appreciate that, of course. So thank you to everyone for that.
Thank you, Ms. Merklinger and Mr. Rothstein.
Excuse me. Yeah, certainly very, very dense. I don't mean me, I mean, it's a lot in here. Yeah, I was thinking maybe we should go to 2-year strategic plans, 1.5 year instead of 5. There's just too much to take in one presentation here. Just a few questions. With regards to the dampers on the HVAC units that were updated. Excuse me. Dr. Cascone, you mentioned that the brains that were purchased are reusable as we replace those older units. Is that something that we can do with the knowledge and ability that we have in-house, or does that require additional funding to bring in specialists for that?
The demo, if you will, basically the removal of the parts could be done internally, but ultimately the reinstallation would need to be done through a vendor.
And would it be fair to say we expect that that would still result in some savings, even though it
Yes.
would be? Thought so.
And Mr. Rothstein, I'm really glad you asked about dampers. You know how much I love talking about dampers.
Listen, it's one of the things that you and I share. Fascinated by dampers. And with regards to grant writing,
Yes, sir.
maybe just sort of a sentence or two on how is the school, so we have a grant writer specifically in the school district. How will that role interact with the school board vendor in order to, I don't know if it's coordinating with,
Yeah.
overseeing the work. Can you describe a little bit how those go together?
I do believe that as the superintendent, and I think Mr. Mendez as well. I think anyone in in the central office cabinet role with sort of a kind of a 30,000-foot view, should and can have access to the weekly updates, with, again, with that kind of high level view of what the organizational needs are. They're able to sort of key in on something, go, wait a second, like that's something that could help us. Once that moment of identification happens, then you work to kind of assemble a small group of folks that makes sense to be part of that process. And it's safe to say that the grant writing person in the district would typically be part of that. That being said, there is critical mass for people, right? So it'd be unrealistic to ask somebody to be engaged maybe in 3 grant writing projects simultaneously. So ultimately, there needs to be a lead person for a grant project. But the benefit of having that grant writing partner is that they're really shepherding a lot of the details. They're asking you for like information, but then they're helping to kind of craft that into the narrative. They're telling you where you have holes in the application. So they're really facilitating that process and taking a lot of the responsibility off the grant writer. So it's sort of like a fluid process. But I think it starts by, and listen, one thing I did do with this previous partner is when we get those updates, I push those out to as wide a circle as people as possible, because I have my lens, but there may be, and that includes the faculty. Because the faculty, a teacher might have an idea for a project and see a grant that to me didn't necessarily trigger an interest, but they may see it and say, wow, this could really help our curriculum. And of course, we would loop in the supervisor and things of that nature. So but I do think as the superintendent, I'm sort of the ringmaster when it comes to that, in keeping an eye out for things and then sharing it with, say, Mr. Mendez or Miss Mullen or whomever, to say, I saw this could be interesting, and it kind of works like that.
Great. So with regards to curriculum, thank you for the explanations of vertical articulation. Sounds productive and systematic and all of the things that we need right now. I guess my concern, which maybe is just from a lack of the real understanding of the details of how all this gets implemented, is that it feels sort of, to me in my gut, like there's a little bit of a whack-a-mole scenario going on, where you address one set of issues, and then maybe focusing on those, there could always be a little bit of slide in another area, which becomes the issues that you address at the next time. And that may just be sort of in the nature of education, that you're constantly trying to shore up one area. And in doing so, maybe there's, you inadvertently create a lack in another, which is in my head sort of what the pandemic did to us in general, that we covered off on the basics and did what we really needed to do to keep things going strong and going well. And then we know that there are certain things that you just can't do in that environment. And so you plan for how you can address them. And I bet you're wondering if there's a question in here, and I'm wondering the same thing. I thought I had one.
I think I can answer your question.
Thank you. And I hope it has to do with dampers.
Absolutely. So I think this is where the importance of, the NJPSA, Principal Supervisors Association, talks about this connected action roadmap or CAR. And so I think this is where we really have to make the most of our systems, right? So it's starting with the process in which we've been engaging board goals, district goals. We're going to have to get a lot of mileage out of our August administrative retreat when we start talking about administrator goals, and then even perhaps more differentiated by school, and then how those administrator and school goals are translating down into student growth objectives that all teachers are required to set, and making sure that those student growth objectives are really being deliberately set and connected to identified needs within the data. Now, it's not a panacea, but I think it definitely, it mitigates the extent to which we're playing that whack-a-mole, because we're leveraging and connecting, those macro systems down to that micro level in the classroom. I also think important in this is going to be, and also something we're going to focus on at the administrative summit, is this idea of prioritizing focuses for observations, for classroom observations and supervision of instruction. What are the critical things we need to be looking for in our classroom observations? Do we see them the same way? Do we understand them the same way? And so that we're using those classroom observations as a means to help teachers develop in the areas, and arguably perhaps the most important one is differentiation of instruction. We've talked about it for decades. Next year, it's arguably more important than ever and more necessary than ever. So certainly something that as an administrative team, we need to have a common conception of what that looks like in different grade levels and different subject areas, and be giving similar feedback and observations so teachers can grow. So I think those are two systems level pieces that can mitigate that to some extent.
Makes sense. And I didn't hear a mention of dampers, but we can move on because
Don't worry, we'll get back.
we'll get there.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned with regards to teacher adoption of technology that it was one of the silver linings that we'd had trouble moving the needle in that direction. And I'm sure we're not unique in that at all, but this forced us to take steps, and we made a lot of progress there. In terms of student achievement, I was just curious, is there anything else that's sort of that silver lining in the storm, where what we've gone through in the last year and a quarter brought out something that we weren't really expecting that really aids and assists in student achievement? And if the answer is maybe, and we'll get back to you, that's okay, but
Mr. Mendez? I know you have kind of more frequent conversations with the curricular supervisors and they with teachers. So anything that emerged?
Yeah, I would submit that although we would have thought it not optimal prior to our entering into hybrid instruction, our teachers needed a lot of professional development on how to use technology for instruction. And if we had surveyed our staff, and we were developing so many plans for technology, and over this year, our teachers have, wow, right? They've really learned how to use that technology to support instruction. And so then there's a lot of takeaways from last year that we're going to bring into this year. So I would say in terms of student achievement and how are they helping them to support, the technology has allowed us to teach content in different ways, right? So then a student who learns differently, we're able to apply a lot of different strategies, not just the lecture, right? Or the small group, but now we can support them in many different ways. We're able to use the technology to assess students quickly, to know where they are, and then use that data to inform the instruction. I would submit that another really powerful thing that is probably lateral, seems tangential, but it really directly impacts, is the ability for teachers to meet in grade level and across the schools, right, across the whole district, to discuss content and how to help the students. And that to the teachers has been vital, because now they are able to do that on Zoom or Google Meets, right? They don't have to leave anywhere. We're not traveling time. They're able, there's no restriction. They're able to meet with teachers across the entire district and really talk about what sound best practices are you implementing in your class that are working, and then they're able to bring that into theirs. And so then we're seeing benefits of that. I would submit that a third one is all of the different software technology that was made available to us last year for free because we were in pandemic. Now we've kind of piloted all of those things, and we're able to say, of the plethora, we want to keep these top 20 because there's where we saw a lot of results with our students. And so then now teachers were able to kind of try those out, and now they've got training, they received the opportunity to work with that software, and now they're able to implement that. So that's something that came. So again, while they may not seem directly tied to student achievement, they do impact the student achievement, and I would think that that's what we received.
no, those do seem very connected. Thank you. I would have been happy with one, but if you have three, that was great. Let's see, I think I had one or two more. With regards to restarting the survey through Hanover Research on Equity and Diversity, you mentioned early next year, Dr. Cascone. Do you mean early next calendar year, like
Yeah.
Q1 2022?
Yes, as early in the fall as possible.
Oh, in the fall, so the school year.
We considered doing it during the summer. I mean, we could do it during the summer, but ultimately we felt that our response rate would be better at the beginning of the school year as opposed to, during the summer when people are off the grid. But our intention is to administer that as soon as possible after the school year starts.
Oh, good. Yeah, when you said the start of the year, I thought you meant calendar year,
Right.
like January
School
2022,
year.
but we'll start sooner. Good,
Yes, sir.
good. I'm very happy to hear that. And I guess that's it. I thought I had one more that I might have missed, but I think we'll all manage to get on anyway. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rothstein.
Thanks.
And Vice President Tony Clark.
Thank you so much for the presentation. A lot to cover. I think as many of my colleagues have, I'm trying to get my head around the grant piece of this as well. I think, but before I get to that, I did have a question about the goals and goal 1, objective 2, where we talked a little bit about the K2 devices that were the oldest and those are being swapped out. And I'm just wondering, do the students, what's the need for them? Are they going to be using those daily? Is it something that's going home with them? Because we're trying to make sure that they have a device at home that they can do homework on. And then, that's kind of what I wanted
Yeah.
to understand about
Great
that
question.
piece.
So there's a few points on that. They will predominantly be shifted back into a school-based model where they'll be accessible through a cart in the classroom. They typically will not be brought home other than on the high school level where it is one-to-one. We will have reserves that can be used as loaners for a variety of different reasons, not the least of which if students need to be home for 10 days for a particular reason. And finally, we recently, as I had mentioned previously, sent out the survey to the community, and we've received about 500 responses from parents indicating that their children are without a personal device at home. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't a computing device in the house. It just means that there isn't more than one. They don't have their own. So with the submission of that grant, we'll be able to ensure that any parents that whose children are in need of a personal device are able to get one through this grant. So with that kind of three-pronged approach is how we'd be using it.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And then back to the grant questions, just to kind of follow on with some of my colleagues have said. I know I'm trying to get my head around of sort of how many people we have who are writing grants that are kind of the bigger ones, not the smaller ones that a teacher may use or somebody else may need. How many people do we have to have doing that? Do we have an overall monetary goal, or is it specific to a particular area that we're focusing on? And, which ones are the ones that are sort of annual, that are regular that we go for? And are there ones on our sort of wish list that we want to go for over the next year or two that we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's like, that's sort of like the proverbial onion right there. So let me try and take a stab at that. So yes, there are annual, we'll call them grants, but they're really more entitlements. And that's,
Okay.
your ESSA grant. This year we had a flurry of new grants like that, through the COVID CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. But that's not typical. Now, when it comes to that ESSA grant, there has typically been a person who sort of shepherds those grants, but with the input and the involvement of other administrators. For example, Mr. Plata, the world language and ESL supervisor, is obviously integrally involved in the development of the Title III portion of that grant. Ms. Mendez is, fair, and others are fairly involved in the development of the Title II portion as it relates to professional development. The principals tend to be involved, and the supervisors to some extent in the Title I. So and I think that's in general, kind of a rule of thumb for grants. You have one person who kind of serves as the shepherd, if you will. And then as you peel back the layers of that grant, you recognize, okay, this person needs to be involved, this person needs to be involved. Typically, the business department has a role to play in that as well. So that's that. Now, in terms of grants that are on our wish list, I would say Ms. Huerta, alluded to one earlier. The pre-K expansion grant is definitely something we have our sights set on. In terms of other grants that are out there, nothing comes to mind. I think the challenge with grants is that I still kind of feel in a lot of cases, grants are like fitting a square peg into a round hole. It's like you're sort of looking for a need that matches the grant, as opposed to finding grants that truly match needs that you have. And I still continue to kind of wrestle with that as I prospect on my own and I look through grants. They can be they're very specific, and it's really the bent of the organization that you're sort of matching to your need. That's why I like the foundation grants, because they tend to be a little bit more open-ended. They have more just broad topics that they want you to submit on, but they're not all that specific. Like we applied for an American Honda Foundation grant this year. Unfortunately, we were not awarded it. But we had some flexibility to develop a program that kind of matched our needs. But I think it's fair to say, Ms. Tunnicliffe, that your questions are well taken. I do believe that we, like every school district, need a more cogent strategy as it relates to generating additional revenue, including but not limited to grants, sponsorships, partnerships, advertising, and what have you. As it relates to a strategic plan, and again, I don't want to be presumptuous for the community, but I would argue that would be a relevant and worthwhile goal to put in a strategic action plan, is to really understand how we can expand upon that revenue generation, and not just grants, because again, they can be very pigeonholed.
So should we go forward and add that to the plan? Do we have the personnel to write those grants and to research and do all the work that's necessary?
Well, I think that we do have the personnel to write grants, because again, it tends to be a platoon approach to writing a grant. And again, when you have a contracted grant writer, they do a lot of the heavy lifting, or they should do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of compiling the information they get and putting it into a competitive package. On a broader revenue generation piece, no, we don't, right? We don't really have a personnel that could be committed to that. Now, when you look at like a private school model, and you look at a headmaster, which would be the comparison to me as the superintendent, one of their primary responsibilities is development and fundraising, right? Like that's a big part of what they do. It's a big part of how their success is measured. And yes, I think that certainly is, as the superintendent, I would play a role in that. But having somebody that was really could specialize in that could get out into the community and be cultivating partnerships. My previous district, we had a person who was part-time. I'm not sure whether it's legal to have somebody that's exclusively employed for that purpose. So it would have to be some sort of a hybrid role.
Okay.
But no, for that piece, we do not have a dedicated personnel for that right now.
Thank you. My other question, I think, revolved around around the health and wellness piece and the cell things that we're doing right now. And I'm just kind of trying to understand what has been the how many students are we serving right now? And what's the interest in this? And how are we serving this? My understanding is we're doing this virtually right now for the health of the cell, or is that in person going on?
I think the cell is virtual,
Right.
correct? And it's happening later in the summer, or is that happening, or is it
It's happening now. So, and looking at that and what we have to do for the fall, I'm trying to understand like what we're doing now and what's the usage going on right now? And what do we anticipate to be happening in the fall that we're going to need to focus on
Yeah.
resources towards that?
So I'm glad you asked that question. I mean, I would say, the program is, relative to the overall student population is fairly limited,
Mhm.
right? So I think and I haven't, tapped into the minutes of the mental health committee more recently, but Dr. Vespignani and I did receive an email today from Ms. Butler, who's really starting to process what's been coming out of that committee and start to kind of organize it into kind of priorities and focuses for next year. I would argue that has emerged as an important focus and a district goal for next year. Like
Mhm.
exactly how that gets teased into a goal is still in development.
Mhm.
But I think understanding, getting a handle on where our students are socially, emotionally when they come into the school year, in the same way that we might assess their reading level. Of course, I'm not suggesting that, we put them on on a couch and,
Right.
but in some way, shape or form, deliberately go about having a mechanism by which we understand where our kids are coming from,
Mhm.
process that, and then provide opportunities over the course of the year, throughout the year, to be tending to that and revisiting it to understand how they're coming along. It will need to be a focus. I would argue that must be a district goal for next year.
Mhm.
Now, we're making some decisions in a vacuum. For example, while we've typically implemented a character ed curriculum on the elementary level, in my more recent conversations with Ms. Butler, the idea now is that let's put that aside initially and move into an SEL curriculum. And the last I spoke with her, and that was several weeks ago, she was researching various SEL curriculum to implement
Mhm.
and to fund through, I think it's the ESSER 2 fund, if not the ESSER 2, the ESSER 3. So, we're still in the process of developing a cogent approach for next year. And I would argue that's really the work that needs to be done moving forward in the next several years,
Mhm.
and may be valid for a strategic action plan, is as opposed to it being, I don't want to say it's quite catch as catch can
Mhm.
and fly by night haphazard.
Right.
It's not quite that, but it's certainly not consistently systemic in the way we've approached it. And we're not unusual in that regard. I
Yeah.
mean, I think in a lot of ways, there are very few school districts that are implementing an articulated, cogent, cohesive approach to SEL. We're
Right.
still trying to figure out exactly what it is,
Yeah.
to be completely honest with you, what it is, what it isn't. So, but that's work that's happening right now. And as I mentioned in Ms. Merklinger in her previous question,
Mhm.
on the 16th, we'll be able to present some more specifics as to what kinds of interventions and actions we're going to put in place, programs
Mhm.
to tend to that.
Thank you. Just make sure I don't have anything else. I don't think I do. So we talked a little bit about like the untapped alumni piece of this, and I know Cynthia Cumming had done some profiles on alumni that were put on social media and stuff. Is that something that should be important as we consider the goals and strategic plans that, highlighting other alumni, and what does that lead to? Is that something where we're looking for fundraising out of
Right.
that, like a college or university model, and being able to tap successful alumni to bring in revenue sources for different things as well?
For sure. And I think that's one way in which, and I just want to clarify before I make this next statement. While we have parted ways with Hanover for grant writing, we've maintained their services for research and consulting. And so contemporaneously, really, while actually I shouldn't say that, while we sort of are in a holding pattern with the equity audit, Mr. Mendez and I had a conference call with them yesterday, and we've asked them to do some research for us on best practices and honors programs and honors criteria from really vast amount of research they have in very similar school districts. So that's a good example of a project we could put them on and say, give us everything you have on public school districts that have really robust, lucrative alumni programs. What are they doing? And somebody's doing it well.
Yeah.
What are they doing? Let's replicate it. But yes, that is absolutely one of those revenue generating streams that presently is not tapped at all.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think as it relates to a strategic action plan, if it were a goal under a bucket of revenue generation,
Mhm.
that could be a specific objective within that goal.
Okay, thank you. Um, that was- Oh, I did just want to make one comment that I was particularly excited to hear that we did have so many students who participated in the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Survey. So, because I think that's really the target we're trying to do this work for, so that we can make them feel more comfortable. So I was really excited to hear that.
Far and
So
away our largest group of
Yeah.
stakeholders.
that's wonderful. So
Exponentially larger than any other.
was it mostly high school students, or was it a mix of?
I would say
their
it was
middle
probably
school?
skewed more towards secondary, but there were
Hmm.
some middle and some upper elementary as well.
Great. Well, I think that closes out my questions, Ms. Scales. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Cliff. And before I go on with my questions, I just want to announce to our folks who are streaming, the chat is not being monitored. And so we cannot respond to you. But we're happy that you're there and trying to interact with us, but we do not have a monitor for the chat. And this has been a very interesting and informative process for us, because we're looking back to 2017. We're looking at where we are presently, and then our board tonight, we're asking questions about where we're going. And so this is a wonderful exercise for us. And many of my fellow board members have addressed some of the questions that I had. One of the things that I'm very interested in are not just the 5-year strategic plan, but 5-year tech plan, 5-year enrollment plan, as we look back at our demographics. I'd like to see a lot of data. And I know we have a new employee, Dr. Hollins, who's coming on board. And this really drives continuous improvement when you've got data, and not just talking about creating or establishing, but starting with baseline data, setting goals, looking at the progress that you're making along the way. And that's something that we certainly have room for improvement here in West Orange. And so I hope that that's something that as we work on this strategic plan. And by the way, Dr. Cascone, when do you see us beginning the process for the strategic plan?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that
The 5-year one.
it would commence in September.
Okay.
Yeah, and we probably will want to connect with school boards. And
Yes.
Charlene, understand what
Yes.
what her availability might be.
Yes,
But
because I think one of our board goals is going to be to do more training with school boards. I received a letter from the president of New Jersey School Boards, and they just talked about all the services that we're entitled to, that we're not availing ourselves of. So I think that that's something we need to do, but Charlene is a very busy woman, so we have to get on her calendar now. Yeah, so again, I was interested in the 5-year tech plan, and really making sure that whatever we do is measurable. We started with that quote from Drucker about measuring. And so let's make sure that as we develop our district goals, as we develop our board goals, that they are all measurable. And we beat to death the acronym SMART, but that makes sense, you know, where they are specific and achievable and measurable and repeatable and timely. And so there should also be a point person when you develop that action plan. So if something is coming out of the business office, you know, it would have Mrs. Flowers' name attached to it, or if it's curriculum, so that there is someone who is monitoring the progress along the way.
President Trigg-Scales?
Yes.
I just want to add one, and I agree. I just want to add one notable challenge. If we start our goal process in September, and we know that the superintendent evaluation process needs to commence in May, and the superintendent's evaluation is based upon the outcomes of the district goals. That gives us, it gives us 9 months, which is not a short amount of time. But I think when you talk about, whether it's utilizing existing data or administering some sort of an assessment by which you establish baseline data, implementing your whatever intervention it may be or process, and then doing a subsequent measurement. It's an aggressive timeline, particularly when you're talking about, and I think that's why it's important. I think sometimes our goals are too broad, because to try and establish a broad, systemic, albeit measurable goal in that amount of time amidst everything else can be a challenge. So I think if we're talking about measurable goals, they have to be like kind of when we're talking about doing scholarly research, they have to be really funneled down,
Right.
really specific. And I think sometimes they are way too broad, to be really feasible to accomplish from baseline to post measurement within that amount of time. So I just thought I would mention that.
Right, exactly. I agree 1,000%. Looking on page 19, with STEM, I had a question about how we measure the effectiveness of all of these programs that we have put in. Mr. Mendez, might you? Or Dr. Keston?
So from a standpoint of, I think one measurement has been, and it's kind of reflected in the slide, which is the increased in enrollment and interest in STEM courses on enrollment on the high school level after the establishment of the program on the middle school level. I would say if we're talking about something as nuanced as studying the impact of STEM programming on math achievement, I would gather to say probably not. We probably have not done that. Are we measuring overall levels of student satisfaction and engagement in school are we comparing and contrasting engagement in STEM courses versus more traditional academic courses? I don't think so. But those are all valid focuses for goals in terms of measuring efficacy of programming. But I think it speaks to your point, President Trigg-Scales, that and I don't think it's just the West Orange piece, although I think there are school districts that do it better than others. But that is a need here, is using data to inform decision-making and goal setting, for sure.
Right, because I'm just looking at the way the objective had been written. So as we go forward, maybe we can tighten up that one if we continue to press on. Oh, I had a question about yoga. That was so cool. We're doing yoga in a virtual setting. Will we continue to do yoga? All right. That's great. I'll have to come in and join in, because I'm definitely a beginner. And looking at food service on page 24, well, thinking about food services. When everybody gets back, I hope that the advisory boards will kick up again and our allergy families will be actively involved in that process, because I know lunch is a big deal, Dr. Cascone, as you said. That's the one nut that's increasingly hard to crack. No pun intended for our allergy parents. And I think maybe that's it for me. And so again, thank you very much. And now we're going to move into questions from the public who are here with us first, before we move to our Google questions.
On agenda items, President Trixie.
On agenda items only, yes. And if you would state your name and address for the record. See, I got used to you doing it. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Brian Rock. I live at 63 Rock Spring Avenue. I have, thank you for the report on the strategic plan. It was very thorough, as everybody mentioned. One quick comment and two questions related to that. So one with goal 2, you specifically singled out college and career readiness, and this is common in education. We always talk about those two. But as we move forward and create a new strategic plan for the next 5 years, I would encourage you to think about citizenship readiness as well. I'm a social studies teacher, so I'm a little biased in this, but I tend to think that citizenship readiness and our job as a district to prepare students to be active citizens is equally important as our job to prepare them to go to college and to prepare them to so think about that as we move forward. Moving questions, you talked about the STEM programs and mentioned that the enrollment increased, which is great. But thinking about this through a lens of diversity and inclusion, I'm wondering, do we have any data on the demographics of who is going into that? The STEM field is notorious for being overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male. And so it would be nice to see that we're recruiting more students who are female, more students of color. But I wonder if the data actually bears that out. And finally, you spoke about recruiting more educators of color and looking at the disparities between student demographics and the demographics of educators. You talked about some different ways that we can change the pool of applicants and who's coming into the district. But I wonder if we're also going to audit the hiring practices of the district itself, right? Once an applicant comes in, who is it that's being picked for an interview? Who is it that's being moved up the interview process? And are we ensuring that we're looking at that through the focus of equity and inclusion as well? Or are we inadvertently allowing implicit bias to replicate the people that have always been teachers and the people who are the majority of the teaching staff today? So thank you.
Yes, step right up. Thank you. And again, if you would state your name and your address for the record.
My name is Larry Weintraub. I'm at 76 Cobain Terrace. So first, very thorough presentation and really interesting listening to the questions and the answers and the back and forth. I want to really commend the board and the administration on the goal of full-time, 5-day-a-week, in-person instruction. I was really excited to hear the composition of the committee that you're putting together to write down the health and safety guidelines and getting in front of dealing with vaccines and how the board and the district is going to handle that. So really great to hear that. Question I had with respect to the strategic report, I noticed that looking at grade 6 or coming out of grade 5, 39% of students were below grade level looking back at the May in reading. And I noticed that the reading report focused a lot on K through 5 interventions. And so what is being done 6 through 8 and above on those scores? Particularly interested in that. My son is entering Edison next year. So I was interested in understanding what's being done to address that gap, because it doesn't disappear just because the students leave 5th grade.
Thank you. Thank you. We generally answer the questions at the end after everyone has
great.
completed it. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions from our public? Okay, so we have some Google questions. Okay.
you want me to
if
answer
You want to
the-
address these two? Yes.
And then I'll answer those one by one, just so
Okay.
So yes, good questions, good points from Mr. Rock, and thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned that because in my presentation for the personnel piece, I neglected to mention not only recruitment but also hiring and retention, right? So when we do, for example, bring diverse staff members on board, any staff members, but understanding that it can be a little bit more difficult for a diverse staff member that may be in a school that is not particularly diverse. We know this from anecdotal feedback. We know this from exit interviews, and we also know it from the research and literature. So what are we doing to pair them with the right mentors? What are we doing? And Dr. Vespignani performs 30 and 60 and 90-day check-ins with staff members to sort of take their temperature, if you will. And it's interesting, Mr. Rock, that premise of the extent to which implicit biases are playing into the hiring process. I think it's an intriguing question. I do think that my sense of it is that it is our process sound, right? Are the questions we're asking, the scoring rubrics we're using. I think that's where we need to focus, right? Because I do think at the end of the day, hiring administrators are looking at from their lens based upon the answers they get, who they feel will be the most effective teacher. But suffice to say, and we have our director of personnel here, I know that Dr. Vespignani has been participating and attending a lot of staff development as it relates to this. This might be a worthwhile type of piece to turnkey to the larger team. And really, whether it's Dr. Vespignani turnkeying it or whether it's somebody coming in and training our team on how that could potentially be impacting the way they're interviewing. We do have data on that. I am afraid to say I don't know off the top of my head, but that is the high school team did evaluate. They were looking at predominantly enrollment in higher level coursework, honors and AP, and presenting that to the staff, and looking at that and looking at ways through the counseling process, the student academic counseling process. And that will be a focus of our equity audit, and information that Hanover's requested from us is enrollment by demographics. So when we do ultimately produce an equity scorecard, which probably won't be until towards the end of the fall, it will contain information like that to help inform our decision-making moving forward. And Mr. Weintraub, refresh my memory on your question. I had it and I lost it.
6th to 8th grade.
6th to 8th grade. Thank you. So one of the things we've done, Mr. Weintraub, is over the course of the last 2 years, even amidst difficult budgets, is to continue to add interventionists or basic skills teachers to our middle schools. Up until I think 2 or 3 years ago, we had none. We had no interventionist capacity at our middle schools. I believe we now have, we've added an ELA. We have ELA and math interventionists at both middle schools and at the 6th grade level. I think what we've also done is work on professional development for our middle school teachers to help to help infuse into the literacy instruction approach on the middle school level some more of kind of elementary style instructional strategies, which is to say, not assume that every student's reading at the same level and create differentiated environments, smaller group readings, reading groups by level, Is that fair to say, Mr. Mendez? So I think it's twofold. One, by adding staff, and two is by bringing more of that elementary instructional approach and through assessment data that gives us normed, because that's something we also typically stop doing at the middle school level. We stopped actually measuring kids' reading levels with kids middle school. It's all right, we're done testing your reading level. And so you're absolutely right that that's from time immemorial what's happened. So those are ways in which we're trying to change that on the middle school. Great question. All right, let's go with the Google form. Now let me ask you a question, Ms. Flowers. Are you cherry picking the ones that are only related to agenda items?
Yes. these are
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, our first question, and apologies if I pronounced the names incorrectly, is from Tope Youssef, 20 Hismel Court. Question, comment, in reviewing the various appointments, resignations, and personnel actions, I would like to know how many positions remain unfilled at St. Cloud Elementary.
Thank you, Ms. Flowers. My understanding is that we have 2 vacancies at St. Cloud. One is a clerical aide, and the other is a second grade tenure track position, which becomes available November 1st. Presently, it's a leave from 9/1 to October 31st, which was appointed at the last agenda meeting. So that will be, it'll convert over. So it is technically open, though there is a leave replacement teacher that's been appointed to serve in that position from September 1st through the end of October. Somewhere within that time frame between November 1st, or maybe even now, I could ask Dr. Vespignani, we will post that. Has that position been posted, the tenure track? Okay, so we'll begin that process with that posting in September so that we have a seamless transition after the October 31st. So the long and short is 2, but one that's not really open until November 1st.
Thank you, Dr. Castone. We have another submission from Miss Sarah During, 47 Oak Ridge Road. Will Hazel students have an opportunity to meet or have an introduction to the new counselor before the school year begins? I know some schools have done this in the past with principals or positions as important to the student body as counselors.
Thank you for that question, Ms. Kanduring. So I did speak with Ms. Marti. That this counselor has yet to be appointed. Dr. Vespignani, is that staff member on this agenda? Okay, so she'll be appointed at this meeting. And I did speak with Ms. Marti. I shared this question, this feedback. And once the staff member is appointed, also understanding that the staff member is not contracted over the summer, but Ms. Marti thought that was an astute suggestion and is going to work with the counselor to try and arrange that at some point in time before the beginning of the school year.
Thank you. We have another submission from Blake Smith, 78 Oak Ridge Road. For the in-person schooling for the fall, I would like to know how the schools are going to keep track of who's vaccinated. For the safety of our community, I would like to ask that the staff and students who have access to the vaccine provide proof of vaccination, and if they do not opt for the vaccine, are required to wear a mask at all times. This is the only way I will feel safe sending my children back to school. I guess my main concern is how the school will keep track of this. So that's
Yeah.
more of a comment there.
So that's a great question. And I think it's one of the, it's absolutely one of the kind of essential questions and a short list of questions, if you will, that will be vetted through our advisory council. They'll be able to share with us what is kind of standard practice. And we'll be able to understand, what the approach should be with that. I should also mention that I had requested of the county executive superintendent and the co-chairs of the superintendent's roundtable to convene a roundtable of the Essex County superintendents that will take place this week. And so we'll also use that as a forum to understand the different ways in which districts, if in fact they've already set a course, what they're doing. So again, in the next couple of weeks, these types of questions will be threshed out and will be prepared, as I mentioned previously, by the end of the week, the 13th, to present some clarity to parents in writing. And obviously, we want to strive to ensure that all parents, as much as possible, feel comfortable with the manner in which we're operating our schools in September.
Thank you. Our next submission was from Ms. Laura Nessner. And possibly below, if any curriculum or instruction or map testing or plans for school opening are mentioned in the superintendent report. That was a comment.
I just as a, kind of a side, kind of a tangent to that. So I think that, one of the things that came out of some of our conversation was that at that April 16th meeting, we'll be in a position to provide some key takeaways that have come out of our curriculum instruction assessment subcommittee meetings, and speak really to some kind of high level points as to, and, we've sort of through Ms. Merklinger's questions and others have sort of, kind of uncovered some of the preparations that have been made previously and some of the things that are going to be done out of the box in September. But I think certainly that'll be one of the buckets that we'll address out at the August 16th meeting.
Thank you. And finally, we have.
And was there more to Ms. Nestor? I thought there was more. Was that a different one?
the-
Oh, that's not agenda.
Right,
Okay,
not
gotcha.
agenda. Last question or comment is on agenda items, is from Ms. Sandra Mordecai, 516 Pleasant Valley Way. I sent policy questions, but will repeat here. Policies aren't attached except for in the 879-page manual, the 879-page manual, which isn't searchable on some devices. This one-page list doesn't include a link to what the WO policy is versus the Strauss-Esme policy, a side-by-side comparison. There should be no policies with the NCLB in title or body of it, as that law by President Bush administration was replaced by ESSA in 2015 by President Obama administration, 2415 and 2415.20. What's the status of the BOE Verify Residency Program? Hearing, you want to?
Let's pause there for a
Okay,
second, because they're
sure.
two separate matters. Where do I start? So let's start at the last piece. It is a fair question. And I would ask Ms. Flowers for you to kind of make special note of that point about the reference to NCLB in those policies. My understanding was that as these were updated policies from Strauss-Esme, that they would have redacted all of that language from those policies, but let's double check those policies as we've approved them. And certainly if for whatever reason Strauss-Esme has continued to use NCLB language, we'll have to revise those and re-adopt them without those, because that is absolutely accurate. The way we've approached providing access to the public to policies that are being adopted, and Ms. Mordecai is right on a level, which is that we provide access for the community to the contiguous, yes, kind of almost 900-page PDF file with all those policies. Now, in terms of a cross-reference with the West Orange policy, while we don't do that, if we have made any changes to the boilerplate Strauss-Esme policy, which appears in the aforementioned 900-page PDF file, we do in fact include a standalone file which has the edits that were made to it subsequently reflected on that for the public's review. And in many cases, the edits that are made to the boilerplate Strauss-Esme policies are in fact language from the West Orange policies that we picked out and dropped into the Strauss-Esme policy. So if you're looking at the policy in the, if in fact we have not provided you with a standalone file, one can conclude that we are adopting as is the policy that's reflected in the 897-page PDF file. What else was there? Did I hit it all? Okay. And I know where go ahead with the other question.
What's the status of the BOE Verify Residency Program? Hearings used to be held regularly, but ended during Assistant Superintendent Mendez's tenure. These were held to ensure all students who attend here also reside here, barring extenuating circumstances such as covered under homeless statute, etc.
Yeah. So I can attest to I've sort of, my predecessor took an active interest in the registration department. And so it sort of naturally kind of has been in my office, which is fine. And so I can speak specifically and personally because I interact with the registration department. I don't necessarily on a daily basis, but pretty regularly. They bring residency concerns to my attention. They bring residency questions. All the letters with regard to school placement, disenrollment are all signed by me. They all come across my desk. So it's an office with which I have a fair amount of familiarity since I started. I can tell you that our residency officers apply an extremely strict standard, and our registration person, extremely strict standard when they're reviewing enrollment documentation. Now, that doesn't preclude somebody from producing fraudulent information that doesn't necessarily we miss. I'll tell you, these guys have been doing it a long time and they're pretty hip to fraudulent activity. But that's not to say that sometimes things don't slip through their radar. People do try and enroll in the district fraudulently. More times than not, that fraud does ultimately come to light later because of some sort of quirky circumstance, like a returned piece of mail or what have you. In terms of the cessation of this practice of residency hearings, we haven't stopped doing them. We've just stopped scheduling them as a matter of course. Let me clarify. When we become aware of the fact through some means that we have reason to believe that an enrolled student's parent, guardian, or caretaker is not legally residing in the district, they receive a letter from us. And in that letter, we say, either, you need to submit current residency documentation, or if there is an extenuating circumstance, you can please contact this number to schedule a hearing. And guess what? 9 times out of 10, they don't. They go away because chances are that the identified fraud or lack of residency is accurate, and they're not able to demonstrate legal residency. And so they don't want to go down that road. Every once in a blue moon, we get somebody who actually takes us up on the offer for a residency hearing. Now, it's not a residency hearing in the standpoint of an involved affair like we used to do with the board attorney who was charging us by the hour and the board. It's really an administrative hearing. And we had one this year where we bring the parents in. I'm there, the residency people are there, the registration's office there. Parent has an opportunity to present documentation, and basically based upon what they present, and sometimes in this extenuating circumstance. One of the most common extenuating circumstances is when we have somebody move as a senior. No, we don't disenroll them. We allow them to continue and finish their senior year. That's an example. There could be another emergent family situation where we'll extend the courtesy through to the end of the year. What happened in the past was, what I understand, is it became a lengthy dance with these hearings. We would schedule them, they would show up. They would show up, they would bring part information. And meanwhile, all the while, board attorneys, they're billing. This has actually not only saved the district money, but folks have a tendency to just slip away when they can't demonstrate legal residency. Now, if they come back and they still try and play some funny business with us, that's when we can hold them accountable, in terms of owed tuition or something of that nature. But typically, we don't go after owed tuition if folks just simply, don't respond to that letter. So quite frankly, if I thought it were more effective and efficient to do it the way it used to be done, we'd still be doing it that way. I think the practice that we put in place is more effective and efficient and actually represents a cost savings in legal billing for the district.
Thank you. That's all the questions for agenda action items. And I actually should have that.
Thank you, Mrs. Flowers and Dr. Castone. And thank you, members of the public who shared questions with us. We always appreciate that. And now we're moving to item number 8. Nope, that's wrong. Item number 9. Second reading and adoption of the following board policies, which is our attachment 2. Is there a motion to approve? Thank you, Mr. Rothstein. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Vice President Tunnicliff. Discussion.
Yes, I have a question.
Ms. Huerta.
Yes, so just going off of Mrs. Mordecai's comment about the No Child Left Behind, so 2415 and 2415.20, are we pulling those?
Is that a recommendation?
I'm asking if that's what we're supposed to do. Is that what Dr. Cascone suggested earlier?
I think that it can, considering that at this juncture, I'm not able to verify whether that assertion is correct. And we have another board meeting on August 16th, at which there will be more policies move forward. I don't think it's necessarily a bad practice to perhaps table that particular policy for vote. That's just a recommendation. Ultimately, it's the will of the board, how you want to move forward. Sure.
Follow-up.
Related to it.
Yes,
Yeah,
Ms.
it's-
Merklinger.
It's really, thank you. Are we able, because I believe the full docket of these of 2415.1, .2, .5, .6, I think there's pieces of the title of it, of the program within all of them. Are we able to approve and then at the August 16th, if we need to change it before then, are we able to do that?
So basically what we would have to do is we would do a first reading at the 16th and then a second reading and adoption. So it's actually more efficient for Ms. Flowers and I to go back, vet that assertion on the part of Ms. Mordecai. And if there are edits to be made, we can make them and move it forward for second and final reading on the 16th.
Okay, great. So that would, if we agree, that would be an amended motion.
I can attest to the fact that it's a great point that those are the actual policy titles from Strauss Esme. So, that's something that we need to look, and that's why perhaps it didn't raise an eyebrow, because it's not as if it's just embedded text. It's actually the title. So, I would say, why don't we table all those that are labeled NCLB? And Ms. Flowers, would you be able to advise as to from a procedural standpoint?
Yes, we can, exactly as you explained, we can table this set of motions and then move it forward for our August 16th meeting.
So we need to amend.
We need to- This current motion as it is, we have a motion, let me just go back,
That was for everything.
everything, right, so we can table, right, amend the motion and table this set of policies of the program.
So who made that motion?
I guess I do.
Yes, please.
I make a motion to hold 2415, 2415.0, 2415.02, 2415.05, 2415.06, and 2415.20.
I think any policy that could any policy that could potentially have that nomenclature of no child left behind.
Is there a second? Okay, thank you, Ms. Tunnicliff. Okay, any further discussion?
I just want to clarify then, are we leaving in 2415.30?
All of the 2400s I had as
Okay,
Tabling
so
them.
everything in the
everything in the
2000
2000 program, under 2000 program.
The last one, Mr. Rothstein, is probably safe, but I can't say with certainty that NCLB doesn't appear anywhere in the text.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
any further discussion? There being none, Mrs. Flowers, would you take a vote for us, please?
Mrs. Reta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes.
Vice President Tunnicliff,
Yes.
President Trixfield.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 10, reports, discussions, and recommendations. May I have a motion for Personnel items 1 through 5.
I'll motion.
Ms. Marklinger, thank you. Second,
I'll second.
Ms. Huerta, thank you. And I see that discussion, I see that we have Ms. DeRosa, who is retiring after 24 years at Gregory. So we applaud her and welcome her to the club where every day is Saturday. Any further discussion on personnel items 1 through 5?
I did have a quick question about the curriculum council. I wanted to better understand what they're doing and if we would be getting a report in September when they're done with their work.
Yeah, so the Curriculum Council, Mr. Mendez, you probably can speak with greater facility on that.
The Curriculum Council is part of the curriculum process for any new programs, any feedback that needs to come regarding curriculum. They look and revise, they look and provide feedback for all curriculum before it comes to the board, to include textbook adoptions and program adoptions. And so then we present to the council. It is a part of the teacher contract. They vote the people into that position, and they serve. We meet monthly throughout the year. We have one more meeting next week, right? Tomorrow, is it Tuesday or Wednesday, where you'll receive the last bit of curriculum. And so then they will look at that last piece of curriculum. Again, they make recommendations. They speak with teachers to say, what should we be thinking about in terms of programs or adding to the curriculum or adding to our assessments. And so then they normally do not provide a report, but I think what you would see is if we needed one that Dr. Cascone were able to provide an example of their work, we have minutes for every single meeting and an agenda.
Yeah, and I think it's slightly obscured, but when you move forward the curriculum, and I think within that submission, I think there was also a document that spoke to the process
Yes.
and the curriculum council's role within that process.
Yes.
I think it's also worth noting, Ms. Tunnicliffe, that this is actually a contractual provision. The curriculum council is actually, you're on the negotiations committee, you probably knew that. But certainly we could, if the board wanted to have more of a detailed update on the work, we could do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Voting on personnel, Mrs. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes.
Vice President Tunnicliffe,
Yes.
President Trick Scales.
Yes.
Thank you.
And may I get a motion for approval curriculum and instruction items 1 through 6?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice President Tunnicliffe. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. Any discussion on B, curriculum and instruction?
I did have one question.
Mr. Rothstein.
Thank you. On item number 2, it notes specifically that this is for ELA teachers, and I was curious whether librarians would also have access to this. Yeah, I saw librarians on 3, so specifically they're there, but not on the first one.
So there are 2 separate agenda items. In number 2, Mackin, which is the same company in number 3. Number 2 will provide the focus for the ELA teachers. And number 3 will provide the same focus for our career education to include our library media specialist teachers. So that's how we're providing for both different groups, if I understand the question correctly.
Yeah, I was just curious whether, excuse me, whether there was room for librarians or whether it would even make sense to include them in the first program. I know the first program is in person, the second one is virtual, is that correct?
Oh, no, they're both. It's just separated out because one is funded by the Perkins grant and one is funded by the district.
Okay.
but the librarians are included in the professional development.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I have a question.
Ms.
as well.
Huerta.
Yes, thank you. Can you go a little bit more in depth about item number 5? Recommend approval for the administrator's perceptions of implementing a
Sure.
hybrid learning.
So, we try to, when we have members of the staff who are, coming to the culmination of their doctoral degree and have essentially designed a research study and really just simply need a setting in which to perform it, a population, if you will, with which to perform the study. And so Ms. Jackson, Coach Jackson had reached out to me, I think in the spring of last year, to kind of gauge my, just my stance on whether I thought that we could enable her to do this, conduct her research, at least partially in West Orange. So, and kind of vetted it through the Administrators Association first to see if, they'd be willing for her to solicit participation, which of course is voluntary, no obligation. I got a favorable response from President and Vice President of the WOAA. And so, moving this study forward, and essentially the overarching premise of the study is basically just to solicit input from administrators relative to their impressions of hybrid learning and, how it compared and how it went. So there'll be structured interviews with administrators, the findings of which will be trended out into, into patterns and then be used in the findings of her study. And with any luck, she'll successfully defend and we'll have another doctorate on staff, which will be great.
The results.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure she'd be happy to come to a board meeting and present the findings of her research.
That'll be great. I really like that we're helping our teachers and our community just get better.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest things basically as a part-time researcher is the methodology and finding a population or a setting for your study. So if we can assist in that regard and contribute to the body of literature and research, it's a win-win. So I would have thanked the board in advance for their support.
Thank you.
Any other questions before our vote? All right, Mrs. Flowers, please.
Vote for curriculum, Ms. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes.
Vice President Tunnicliff,
Yes.
President Trixfield.
Yes.
Thank you.
And item C, finance, including items A, 1 through 9, and B, 1 through 13. Is there a motion to approve?
Yes, so moved.
Thank you, Mr. Rothstein. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Vice President Tunnicliff. Any discussion under finance?
A couple of questions.
Mr. Rothstein?
Thank you. On items, excuse me, items 4 and 5, regarding the submission to the NJDOE to request establishment of a special education program. I'm just curious, how long does it take to hear back from the county to get that approval? And I guess some context to that question. Can I assume that this is to start courses in the fall? And really, that's what the heart of the question is do we expect that those would be started in that time frame?
The turnaround on those requests is actually fairly quick.
Okay. Good. And let's see. Oh, and also on item number 6, Stonegate Associates. I was just hoping we could get a little bit of an explanation of that.
Sure. So what Stonegate does for us annually is they review our crisis management manual and make any necessary updates to it. And they also deliver an annual
emergency management and crisis training workshop to our administrative team. That'll happen in August. An additional piece to that is that they have developed a virtual training for teachers. We went with a virtual distance learning approach because it's obviously impossible to train all teachers in brick and mortar in a timely fashion. Originally, they were going to do it, they were going to go to faculty meetings. I said, well, if you go to faculty meetings, it'll be December by the time we've trained all our staff. We need to deliver that. And then if there are buildings that want to schedule you for follow-ups, they said they'd be happy to do that. One additional thing they've done for us through this proposal, what they will do through this proposal is create a training presentation, a PowerPoint presentation regarding emergency management procedures that all permit petitioners will be requested to review and sign off on before they're able to successfully secure a permit, so that they're aware of, what our procedures are, where our exits are, and things of that nature. So it involves all that work. And I should say that just as that our folks, the guys at Stonegate are above and beyond this cost proposal, are very generous with their time, and they've been coming in pro bono basically for our planning meetings with Johnson's Controls for the work that we've been doing to upgrade the foyers, and haven't been charging us for that time. So they're pretty competitive package.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a question.
Ms. Huerta?
Item number 11. Could you just provide some insight and transparency on those stale dated checks?
That would be you. Stale data checks.
Okay, under item 11 with the stale dated checks, in that grid, there's, they're coded based on the checks that haven't been cashed by individuals, whether they were because of, they were aid in lieu payments, tuition reimbursement payments, or registration reimbursements. After so much time, the check can't be cashed, and we do need to void the item. There's a few in the bottom 5 grids. Those were class trips that parents did not, they received the checks and they decided not to cash them. So those reimbursements, we had to avoid those checks as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I have one. Number 13. School lunch prices. I believe that has to be done, but that there is no charge. Would you tell us about that, Mrs. Flowers, please?
Yes, thank you, President Trixfield. So as part of the annual school meals application process, we do have to approve the breakfast, lunch, and meal pricing. However, this year, as it's an extension of last year, it's called the Seamless Summer Option. That's the program that we were approved for, to be able to provide free meals to all families, all students, age 18 and younger in the family. So we are approved to continue that program, but we do, for the application, we still have to go through the necessary protocols in terms of getting the application approved by the state.
Now, is that September through June?
That is correct. It's September through June as of now. And as the program was extended through the summer this past year,
Right.
it could possibly be extended through the summer for next year.
Well, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful. No further discussion. Would you please take a vote for us, please? Thank you.
Mrs. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
Yes,
Vice President Tunnicliff,
Yes.
President Trixfield.
Yes.
Thank you.
And item D, reports, and that is the HIV report that Dr. Testone distributed earlier. Is there a motion to approve? Thank you, Ms. Merklinger. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. No discussion. Mrs. Flowers, would you take a vote, please?
Mrs. Huerta,
Yes.
Mrs. Merklinger,
Yes.
Mr. Rothstein,
yes,
Vice President Tunnicliff,
Yes.
President Trixfield.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 11 on our agenda, petitions and hearings of citizens. And these are questions of any type, either agenda items or off agenda items. We ask you to give us your name and your address, and we do have a 3-minute limit, and that is our clock that we have returned to us. Are there any questions from the people who are here with us this evening? Okay, all right, I see none. And so do we have some Google form questions?
Yes, we
Ms.
do.
Flowers?
Yes, we do, President Trick Scales. The first question or comment is, again, apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly. Mr. Tobe Yusuf, address 20 Hemsel Court. Does the district still anticipate full-time in-person learning in the fall? What thresholds will the school use to gauge whether or not full-time in-person learning will not continue?
The answer to that question is yes. And we've been provided with no parameters that would, no qualifying thresholds or criteria that would alter that, right? Whereas this year, the guidance for schools relative to the mode within which they were operating was connected to the COVID-19 risk matrix, and there were various levels of risk and recommended modes of operation for that level of risk. That's not reflected within the road forward. So presently, we've had no information or qualification relative to threshold. So the answer to that is yes, full-time, all day, every day for everyone.
Our next question and comment is coming from Ms. Laura Nessner. It was very nice to see that we are comfortable with children singing while not properly wearing masks and standing shoulder to shoulder in those pictures from the enrichment program performance. Can we assume that then social distancing will be greatly eased in classrooms and that unnecessary plastic barriers will be removed for September? As I have mentioned before in some of my emails, masks in schools do not bother myself or my children. I would prefer to see that we can get our students in school full-time first. We should have done the MAP testing as was originally scheduled. It would have been much easier to fill in gaps from 6 months than from a year and 6 months. When I inquired about why these assessments weren't being done as originally scheduled, I was brushed aside by Mrs. Mendez and told it wasn't in education. I couldn't understand. If I wasn't in education, I couldn't understand. I do understand how to analyze data and think critically, and more days earlier is better, which is why I have been asking the following questions for quite some time. And although I was told I would get answers, it has been 13 days since Dr. Cascone agreed to forward all of my questions to Ms. Mendez, who did not need it forwarded to her, as she has been on this particular email chain the whole time, as well as many other emails where these very same questions have been asked. She has never responded to my emails regarding these issues. She brushed it off. She brushed all of in my very brief phone meeting with her in the beginning of May. What math content skills and or standards, if any, that would have been covered in typical brick and mortar year were not during last year? What is the plan to address these content and skills as students move into the next grade? How might the curriculum be adjusted to compensate for this? How does West Orange's performance in mathematics compare with the national and or state norms as reflected in the MAP data? Particularly after I have seen a few other schools' summer assignments for rising third with skills we have not yet learned here in West Orange. Will the district account for any impact on the pandemic on MAP scores and adjust and modify the enrichment and honors eligibility process and criteria accordingly? Will the district make the district curriculum accessible to the public moving forward? How can we keep saying how successful last year was when I have spoken to at least 5 other families where high-performing students dropped significantly in their MAP from at least 3 different elementary schools across the district? And these were chance encounters, so I'm sure there are more.
Thank you, Ms. Flowers. So relative to the first part of that, what I can say is that in particular, this premise of how to manage choral classes, how to manage instrumental music classes in the health and safety meeting from 2 weeks ago. Again, I was out of district last week. I did not attend last week's. I know was raised as a question. So that is definitely a specific question, which we will be running through our advisory board. And in terms of what kinds of barriers or what will be in place and what won't be, it's all interrelated, right? So, but again, anything we recommend from a health and safety protocol is going to be presented to our advisory board for for efficacy and for prudence. In terms of Mrs. Nessner's questions, of course, I was not present for the conversation that Ms. Nessner had with Mr. Mendez, though I find it highly unlikely that Mr. Mendez used that kind of condescending language with Mrs. Nessner. I think that there were a number of reasons that the decision was made to not do MAP testing previously in the year. And part of that was just simply the fact that we're administering a test in the middle of the year. Students are in, students are home. The reliability and the validity of the data, considering that the test is being administered at home, and on top of the fact of all the other things that students tests and exercises in which students were engaging. I mean, we certainly, certainly we can engage in a debate as to whether that decision was the right decision. We could argue both sides of it. I'm not sure it's constructive at this point in time to engage in a debate about a decision that was made. I think it's far more constructive to focus on moving forward. As far as the question goes, that is in fact correct. That was that number of days that elapsed. I can tell you that we wanted to be very thorough in our responses to those questions to ensure that the answers that we gave were complete and detailed. In fact, I just reviewed the answers today, and so you can expect detailed answers, Mrs. Nessner, to those questions tomorrow. Mr. Mendez will be sharing those with you tomorrow, though she did address the question about the MAP scores, and in fact, as compared to the national norm, West Orange was either on, slightly below, or slightly above the national norm. So in terms of the anecdotal, and not that I'm dismissing the anecdotal or even the data-driven conclusions by parents, I would caution against painting in broad brushstrokes about the efficacy or the success of our district based upon a handful of perspectives. Again, it doesn't devalue those perspectives, but whether we can draw conclusions globally about the efficacy of the school district, I would urge caution in that regard. And in fact, the data that we've culled relative to the national norms does not actually bear that hypothesis out. Have I left anything out? No.
Our next comment and question is from Ms. Sandra Mordecai, 516 Pleasant Valley Way. I have heard you did away with the ASAP program. Mrs. Castellino and I strongly advocated for that program years ago to ensure student athletes are just that, student athletes. You do kids a disservice if they go off to college and aren't prepared. If a student is failing at West Orange High, they go to their teacher for help and the coach and parents sign off. This was also expanded to band as well. First year, more than 50% of student athletes weren't doing well, and that significantly decreased and the Board of Ed received regular updates. My second issue is how much of the additional spec ed funding recently approved by Governor Murphy is West Orange getting? How will it be spent? Expansion of services or on existing budget?
So let's hit the second question first. It's just a little bit more concrete. To the best of my knowledge, Ms. Flowers, and perhaps I missed this while I was away last week, have we received an actual allocation amount for that more recent fund, that special ed fund?
No, I'll have to double check. on
Yeah, I
that.
mean,
I'll have to verify.
somebody shared that with us last week in some form of an update. And outside of that, I haven't heard of what our allocation is or what the process is for application. So that's a question we can't answer presently. I'm not sure, where, Ms. Mordecai, you heard that we dissolved the ASAP program, the athletic scholarship assistance program, and then the BSAP is for band. I would say anecdotally, and I just kind of want to share this, that when, I attended a track and field banquet at the end of the school year, and I actually never cease to be amazed with, and this isn't, of course, necessarily mean that globally across the board, all of our athletes are performing at a high level. But I will tell you that a good number of our athletes are excelling academically, are gaining admission into high-level academic institutions. That being said, while the ASAP program has certainly not been dissolved, it is on my docket this summer to take a deeper dive into how it functions. Admittedly, I can tell you that I don't know the inner workings of this program. I want to understand how it's functioned. I want to understand the criteria for entrance. I want to understand the criteria for exit. How are we monitoring it, the consistency with which we're implementing it, the consistency between ASAP and BSAP. And this really arose from a board inquiry. I think the board was interested in understanding, not only getting updates, but also understanding a little bit more about it. They were curious. They wanted to understand. And it was really that board inquiry that led me to say, you know what, well questioned. And this is something that's on my docket this summer to meet with Mr. Moore and understand how that program's function. We have absolutely no intention of dissolving the program, but we do have intentions of looking at it and maybe evaluating it after a number of years of being in place and understanding how we could perhaps make it more effective in what it does.
Thank you, Dr. Cascone.
You're
Next comment is from Miss Sarah During, 47 Oak Ridge Road. I'm feeling heightened anxiety as we approach this new year without a commitment to a plan. As districts around us have come out with their plans every day without a commitment in writing to full-time in-person school, and how it will happen feels like a promise that we will once again be taking the path of planning to fail. I know the governor's mandate appears clear, so why we do not have guidance of how this will occur with masks or without, with kids spread out in the class or not, lunch occurring as normal or outside, I'm not sure. Waiting until August makes it very hard for people to secure spots in private school and to prepare their children for any changes that might need to occur. I, for one, have a child who very much wants to stay in public school for her last year of elementary school, but I cannot abide by another year watching her zooming her life away with only a few hours of in-person school, while her brother had an entire year of full days and full activities in school 15 minutes away with the same doctor advising on safety. I just need to know that we are planning on a year with as much normalcy as possible, and I need to see the details so that I know it isn't just placating those of us that struggled through the last year.
So there's a lot there. I want to honor the comments. I think a couple of things. I mean, I think that everyone struggled. there wasn't a person that didn't struggle last year. Whether it was loss of loved ones to the disease, being debilitated by the illness themselves, watching children struggle, within this modality. So I think there's a solidarity and a fraternity in that collective struggle that we had. I also think that, and I understand, because I think we all are living with a certain level of anxiety, right? I think we're all living with a certain degree of uncertainty and, kind of happening out there, right? And we hear about variants and the this and the that and the other thing. And at the same time, we see the stark inconsistency with which different states, different countries negotiate this, right? And so it's perfectly natural, I think, to feel a bit of anxiety and a bit of uncertainty. And I've heard and I've listened, and and if it makes, and I understand how it will make the community feel better, because I did go back and I did read my correspondence from the 15th, and upon reading it and upon some reflection, I said, what, it wasn't quite as assertive as it should have been along these lines. So I have no problem putting out a subsequent communication that makes the community feel more confident, less to say, yes, this is the end game. This is what we're planning for. And quite frankly, we're excited about it. We're excited to be getting back to this. No problem doing it. That being said, and relative to the premise, and I understand, and Ms. Merklinger put her finger on the pulse, and I feel that pulse as well. I know that you would feel better at this point in time if I could give you specifics. But the reality of it is I'm not prepared to do that yet. And while I'm hearing that there are other districts that are putting out plans, when I left town, they hadn't done that. And so I just put out a solicitation to a group of superintendents, Essex County superintendents that are local, to say, did I miss something while I was out? Did y'all put out your plans? And they're like, no, we haven't. Our plan is mid-August. And I think they've been in the same position we are, was like waiting and hoping potentially there was some greater clarity from the state, but recognizing that that's not coming. Now, I didn't sit on my hands until that time. I've been predicting that that's not happening, which is why I've assembled this independent board. But without exception, every superintendent that has reached back out to me, Verona, Glenridge, Cedar Grove, Caldwell, West Essex, Livingston, none of them have put out plans. So I'm not sure which districts are being referred to, but it seems that mid-August is a fairly standard timeline right now, and we will follow that timeline, and a greater degree of clarity, certainty, reassurance will be coming. But make no mistake about it, it's all day, every day, all kids. That's the goal. That's the decree.
Okay, back to you, President Trixgales. There's no more comments.
You said there are more comments?
There are no
Oh, there
more.
are
Back
no
to you.
more. Okay. All right. Thank you, Mrs. Flowers and Dr. Cascone. And now we're up to the point where we're going to hear from our board members. Board member reports.
Thank you, President Trixgales.
All on you that time.
I'm used to it. I go first. That's what I do. So my board reports, just an update with New Jersey School Board Association. We do have trainings available to us if we would like to take advantage. August 11th being this is a U.S. Marine Leadership Series, being proactive and anticipating. And August 18th, there is Beyond COVID-19 New Jersey Schools Reopening. And in October, there will be the workshop conference for all school board members. Also, there was the deadline today to submit your petitions for school board elections that are coming up this November. So looking forward for those candidate announcements. For the PR committee, As spoken about in Dr. C's presentation, we did talk a bit about being one of the school districts that, one of the few school districts that do have an active social media presence, and we try to work hard on engaging with the community. President Trigg Scales and we participated in a PR training from New Jersey School Board a couple of months ago. And one of the main takeaways that I took from that training, well, one of the reasons that was highlighted as to why schools don't participate in social medias and outreach in that way is for fear of the negative feedback and the critical criticism that often comes from those types of interactions. And so I'm just glad to see that we don't shy away from those uncomfortable and difficult conversations. And I do want to see how much more deliberate, strategic, and impactful we can be as a committee. So looking forward to a new school year and planning and having goals that we can measure. Thank you. Oh, and one more thing. I know that it is summer vacation. A lot of the schools are still wrapping up summer school. We're doing a lot of summer enrichment programs are wrapping up now. I was able to attend the toboggan marker dedication with Dr. Cascone a week ago with the historian Joe Fagan, Council President Cindy Matute Brown, and Councilman Rutherford were also there. It was a really nice event. It was at the bottom of Hazel Avenue, or at the corner of Hazel Avenue and Valley Road. And it was a nice presentation. We also got to see some artwork from the high school students. And so that was really nice. And I was glad to be there. Thank you. That's all. Thank you for everyone that came out tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Wertz.
Keeping it short tonight, I just want to thank all
Matt?
the faculty and staff that
Are you still on?
participated in the summer enrichment program and continue to work through the summer. I know a lot of the kids really benefit from it, and some of the kids were playing wiffle ball the other day and having a great time there.
We lost
Coach Lumpkin, so definitely want to thank. One of the great things about the summer is that we are starting to reopen, and the band is back out on the field practicing. So I'm sure the folks around the high school are going to hear their practices and working the color guard with their banners and whatnot. So definitely looking forward. I believe the football team is starting to sell tickets, so keep an eye out for that. The cheerleading team has a clothing drive coming up. And as we start to reopen and things start to come up, we'll start making sure we announce, and like Linda said, with social media, ensuring that the community knows what's going on with our schools.
Thank you, Ms. Merklinger. Mr. Rothstein.
Thank you. Just a quick update on the work of policies. We're completing an assessment and update of the remaining policies that need to be adopted. And Dr. Cascone, I heard a rumor that you might have a list already coming together for an additional set of policies that are under administrative review that could be presented for second reading and adoption. So I definitely want to connect with you to make sure that I'm updating my list in accordance with that. And then Mrs. Merklinger, of course, will connect to look at to reassess any remaining policies that were in our court to address from a board point of view. And boy, looking forward to getting these wrapped up soon. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rothstein, and I must agree with you on that one. Vice President Sunny.
I don't have a report tonight. I think Ms. President Trigg Scales will give a little bit of an update on the legislative piece.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to do that. Okay, no problem. Okay. All right, so I am going to make this quick. Negotiations, for those of you who missed it, the Board of Ed is happy to announce that we have a settled agreement with the West Orange Administrators Association, and we're really pleased about that, as are they. And we are currently involved in ongoing negotiations this summer with the West Orange Education Association and Local 68. And as Vice President Tunnicliffe said, I just wanted to mention it, and I see Mr. Mendez stepped out a minute, but Governor Murphy just signed a new bill, a new law, actually, and this is in line with what Mr. Rock was talking about earlier, that every middle school in New Jersey must offer, and this is mandatory, a civics class and curriculum. And checked with Mr. Mendez, we already do that at grades 6, 7, and 8. And we are one of the districts that piloted that curriculum a while back. So really pleased to announce that. And then I just wanted to remind my fellow board members that it may be summer, but we have a lot of work to do. And some of the things that we've got to do, we have to complete our board self-evaluation board. You have some information in your email asking you to take a look at that. And as the board is committed to self-improvement. And so it's not mandatory that boards self-evaluate, but it is recommended. And so we have decided that we're going to do that. We will be reporting out on the progress that we've made on our board goals. That will be happening very soon. And then from that point, we roll right into setting new board goals for the 21-22 school year. And we're getting input, as Dr. Cascone said. We will be looking at the progress we've made over the last year. We'll be looking at the town hall and survey results, and we'll also look at student achievement data and then those mandated programs. And I think that's it. Oh, I had a question. As you pull into the driveway on Conforti, there's some construction going on there. What's going on there? Do we know?
Those are the shot put pits, the gravel pits.
Oh,
Yeah, it's much needed improvement. I know our field, our shot put throwers, they'll be so excited this upcoming season because this years past, when it rained, it would get very muddy and they would have to dig the shot puts out with a PVC pipe. Yes, so we're excited that we were able to purchase the materials and our own staff, our B&G department is taking care of that. So we're very excited.
that's fabulous. I could not recognize that shape. So shot put was not on my list. But thank you so much. All righty, and that brings us to the close of our public meeting. And the next board meeting will be held at 7:30 p.m. right here on August 16th at West Orange High School. At this time, we are returning, the board is returning to executive session. And so do I have a motion to adjourn the public meeting? Do I do that, Mrs. Flowers? Yes, okay.
So moved.
So moved. Thank you, Vice President. Those always come really quickly. Thank you, Vice President Tunnicliffe. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Huerta. All in favor, I guess? Aye. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here and for tuning in.